Hello everyone, it is time for our weekly live stream. We missed a week last week, I was out of town, and I'm back. We have a lot to catch up on. I've got quite the list over here, and some stuff I want to share with you. So, the trip went well. I drove to Arizona and drove back. I got to spend time with my parents, who I hadn't seen in over 2 years, and I was really happy to do that. Spent a few days and tried to do nothing, because all I do when I'm here is do something. I'm always busy. And they were so worried I'd be bored. And I said to them, I am completely happy with doing nothing at all and just, breathing and kind of give my brain a break. My brain never takes time off. I'm constantly, always thinking. And unfortunately, I dream a lot too, which means that my brain never rests, which is kind of a little bit exhausting. So the nice thing was I was up on a mountain. I was in a forest. I got to just breathe in some fresh air. I was at 5,000 feet. I was up there. And I really had some nice time with family, and I could eat and play with the dog. Oh my God, this dog is so cute. It was an Australian Shepherd mix, and so loving. The most loving dog I've probably ever encountered in my life. It was just a ball of fluff that just wanted to be loved and gave it back. So it's amazing I didn't just put it in my car and drive home. But no, I left my dog with my parents. It's their dog. And I miss it. I miss little Bijou. All right. First thing, of course, is the Reef. The Reef behind me actually did really well while I was gone. Bobby did a great job. Bobby, if you're watching, thank you very much for tank sitting like you always do. You always do it so well. The only thing you might see missing is right over there above my fingertip. There was a blue tort standing taller, and somehow it got knocked down. So I have moved it in the meantime because it was sitting on top of something I cared about. And it's on the sand. I need to clean it up. And fortunately, the fish saw it sitting there on the sand and picked off all the belonia, which is very convenient. So I'm just going to clean off whatever the stick I don't like, glue it back into place, and let it continue to grow vertically. And we're going to be talking about Acropora here briefly, but the blue tort is one of them. And there's like this spot. And, that spot actually looks okay without a stick standing there, but I have a stick, so I'm putting it back. So that was good. No big surprises. I did consume, my Reef consumed all of the top off water, which is interesting. That usually doesn't happen. Remember, I have this Reef behind me, and I have the frag system that has its own top off. And that top off container was completely empty. I was just like really surprised, considering I filled everything up to the top before I left town. I don't even know how many days I was gone. Does anybody know? I think I was gone 8 days. When I got back to Fort Worth, it was 4:45 in the afternoon. I was 4 miles from picking up my dog. Jack was waiting at the boarding place. It's a really nice place. And I could not get there. I spent an hour trying to get 4 miles closer and couldn't do it. I tried everything. I kind of wish I had set up like the Runkeeper app on my phone to just track what I was doing, because if you looked at a map, I was like a spaghetti noodle on the west side of Fort Worth and never, ever got inward toward downtown. The police blocked off every possible conceivable direction I hoped to use. I couldn't understand what was going on. I was forced yet again to abort one direction and go a different direction. And I drove down a road that I felt would not get me there, but I thought I'll try anyway. And when I got to the end of it, there was a policeman waiting right there that just did that whole keep moving, don't stop, keep moving. And I just rolled down the window and said, I understand. Can you help me get to Hewlin? And he says, no. I was like, all right. So, but I did find out from that police officer there was a presidential motorcade coming through Fort Worth, and it hadn't arrived yet. And because of that, none of us could go where we needed to go, which, that kind of sucks. I was kind of thinking, why don't they just use a helicopter and plunk him down right where he belongs? We wouldn't know which direction he comes from or anything. But anyway, I reversed my direction and went away from Fort Worth again, thinking maybe I could go south around the city. And so did another 100,000 people. So I was stuck on this this overpass and barely moving, like 1/10 of a mile an hour. It was just, creeping an inch at a time. And then at one point I looked down and I saw a whole bunch of vehicles with flashing lights, and a few vehicles that had flags on the front. Even filmed a few seconds just for the fun of it. Didn't even know if it was the official group or a decoy. I have no idea how this works. But anyway, Remember, I got to Fort Worth at 4:45, and I got to my house at 6:30. And I'm usually 10 minutes from everywhere. So that was really insane. And I could not get Jack that day. And it was very strange being in the house without a dog. The house was so quiet. You know, normally I make a plate of food, I put it down, I think, oh, will Jack get this? You know, and then I did something else. Oh, where's Jack? And do I need to let Jack out? And is Jack out? I need to let her in. And then I had to go to bed and no Jack. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is just awful. So first thing in the morning, I drove up there and picked her up. She was very happy to see me. She's back. We're having a great time. You know, I'm spoiling her rotten like I always do. I came home with a toy for her. So she's very happy about that. All right, enough about the trip. Went really well. One thing behind me you may have seen, maybe, is the Reef Choice Awards of 2022, and I got it for a lifetime achievement. So this was awarded on Instagram. Thank you very much. Apparently there was a vote, and I won the vote. So when I received it, I thought, am I done? Lifetime achievement means I've done it all. I've achieved a lifetime's worth of work. So anyway, I have this award. And it's 3D printed. I could actually put it in the reef and see if my urchins want to clean it. But I think I won't. Maybe I'll put it somewhere safer and less inclined to possibly grow some algae. But no, that was really cool. There was a bunch of awards given out. I even reached out to one of the other award winners asking if they would come on the show, and they weren't available today. So hopefully we'll get them in a future episode. Tomorrow, look, I've done something fancy in preparation for today. Tomorrow is going to be the Fort Worth Coral Show, and that is taking place here in Fort Worth. It's related to the Coral Farmers Market, and if you are wanting to attend, I am going to be there along with my club, DFW Mass, and I have a booth next to DFW Mass. So I'm not even sure what I'm going to bring yet, but I'm going to bring some dry goods, and then of course there's going to be a lot of guys selling corals. So if you're looking for corals in the local area, there is a show tomorrow that will last from 11 to 5. So if you would like to attend and have fun and hang out with some hobbyists, I'll see you there. The next thing I want to show you is, oh, that didn't work, the Aquatic Expo. So the Aquatic Expo is taking place in Atlanta, April 2nd and 3rd. And this is a variation of the Mackinac show that happens every September. So this event is taking place the 1st of April. First weekend of April. I can't even say the sentence. The first weekend of April. And they are doing a freshwater and saltwater show, which is like the Aquashella show a little bit. I'm not sure how it's all going to go. It's the first time they've ever done this one. But I will be there along with a bunch of other speakers. So if we look down here, I'll just keep scrolling because for some reason the speaker group doesn't. Here's your schedule. There's a lot on this page. And I'll put the link to this page I'm on in this video's description after the live stream is over, in case you're interested and want to know more. But there you can see some of the speakers. You got Felicia, myself, Jake Adams, Summer, Bob, and Sanjay. Oh, there's 3 more. Dana Riddle, Jerry. Okay, that's it. So there's 8 speakers, it looks like. And if you would like to attend that day, you are welcome, or either day or both days. I'll be there as well. So, and I'll be talking about preparing for emergencies, because it seems like that's all I do is live through emergencies. All right, look at that. So I feel real professional creating a couple of scenes. It's something I've been needing to work on for a long time. More stuff to show you. The latest issue of Coral Magazine is in. This one's wrapped because it's for sale. My issue is not wrapped because I already received it as a subscription. So I have these in my shop. I actually have a lot of different issues. If you're looking for something to read, Coral Magazine is the magazine I recommend to everyone. Recently, someone asked me, what would be a good book you'd recommend to an 11-year-old that's interested in reef keeping? And I said, Coral Magazine. I know it's not a book, but you know what? It's got a binding like a book. This issue here is the March-April issue of 2022. They're $8 a copy. And like I said, I have a bunch of copies on my website. There's about 8 different issues. So if you're wanting an issue that talks about my reef tank, that was a few issues ago. That's on my website. You can buy it. There's one about Dwayne's SPS reef. There's this one here that just came in about zooplankton. So if you're looking for that, please do peruse Mila's Reef. Oh, let me stick that on the screen so I look like a professional here. Go to milasreef.com, and if you'll go to dry goods and then publications, you'll find Coral Magazine, Or if you look on the right side of the screen, you will see shop by brand and you click coral and all the issues appear on the screen at once, which is a nice feature that I love on my website because I can find things more readily. We have been working on the website for the last couple of weeks. I know I'm droning on and on. I actually have a lot to cover today, so I'm just warning you, this is how it's going to be today. We worked on the website quite a bit over the last couple of weeks. We updated a lot of things that are behind the scenes, and they spent at least 40 man hours fixing the shipping module for my website. So in theory, most things you buy now will calculate properly, which will be fantastic for me because I won't have to send out refunds. And it's fantastic for you because it doesn't make you run away and say, forget that, that's way too much in shipping. Shipping should just be whatever shipping really is. It shouldn't be something that is being computed badly. And that has been an ongoing problem for probably the last 4 to 6 months. Something's been going on with FedEx, and we believe it's been fixed. So if you're shopping this week and you see a number, feel free to let me know if the number looks wildly wrong. You know, if it's somewhere between 9 and 15, 16 bucks, that's probably about right. I have noticed some things are up. I had to ship something to one customer on Friday, and shipping computed $20 for that one order through the post office. And so I thought, well, let me try FedEx. And it was like 17. I was like, okay. Normally the post office is cheaper, but some areas just cost a little bit more. So I think shipping's been corrected. I'm still adding new products to the site. I have things in stock that have not been on the website for some time. And it's a terrible way to run a business because you want to sell your merchandise. And I actually have something in stock that no one has in stock right now. So I'll just tell you because it's not on the website yet. If you are looking for a Nero 5 pump, I have 4 in stock. You can send me an email, sales@milosreef.com, and let me know, and I can just invoice you directly since it's not on the website right now. But I heard they are hard to come by, and they're just the regular price. Whatever the price is, that's what they cost. I'm not marking them up or marking them down. I just have never got them on the website, and they're sitting here, and then someone recently told me, nobody has those. I'm like, oh, I have money sitting on the floor. I really should put that on the website. So I just want to let you know that. And then this is a big one. So I'm planning to read this to you. Let me turn this off. I don't want to irritate you guys with promotion the entire show. Masna, actually I can throw this on the, can I throw this on the screen? Can I do this? Yeah. So I need to scooch out a little bit here so it's more visible. I wish I could scooch it over. See, it won't move. No, that doesn't do it either. What if I do this? I'm going to try something here for a second so I can get it centered. And what if I do this? Nope, nope, nope. Let me try one more thing. One more attempt. Sorry, guys. Masna put out this article. It doesn't fit the screen properly. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'll just talk. How's that? About the America Competes Act of 2022. There's been some misinformation, imagine that, going around that we have nothing to worry about, and there's others that think, well, this stuff happens all the time, but this one is a big one. And I read the whole article, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to read the whole article to y'all. So this is probably going to take about 5 minutes. So if you want to grab a drink and sit back and enjoy, we are going to go over this because the words need to be said. And then, of course, I will put the link in the video's description after the show is over. And that way you can share it with others and get the word out because this one's a big one. Now, MASNA is the Marine Aquarium Society of North America, and it's basically the organization that all the clubs are under. That's our umbrella. But they are not taking some legal stance. They are not some legal entity that will defend us in court or something like that. They are here to provide information, and they state that in this. So I just wanted to make sure to clarify that first of all. So this was released on March 7th. So this is very current. It only came out a few days ago. And the title is MASNA's Position Statement Regarding HR 4521 and Proposed Amendments to the Lacey Act that are contained within the Competes Act of 2022. MASNA, as a non-profit organization of marine aquarium hobby clubs, independent hobbyists, and corporate sponsors, is an organization formed with the heart and soul of the marine aquarist in mind. MASNA's goals are to educate about the marine aquarium hobby, support the formation and growth of marine aquarium clubs, support efforts that eliminate abuses in the marine aquarium hobby as they relate to collection, care, and transport of marine aquarium animals, and support the continued and ongoing growth of the marine aquarium hobby for future generations. A topic of current interest and concern are proposed amendments to the Lacey Act that are contained in the Competes Act of 2022, which is currently under consideration by the U.S. Senate after passing the U.S. House of Representatives in early February 4th, 2022. I'm going to stop right there for 1 second because I did not know this until someone said it out loud, and I was like, wow, that's a big deal. I'm not really good at politics, okay? So if I say something incorrectly, just, kind of accept that I don't know enough. But apparently we have a specific number of senators, and I heard it was like 100. Maybe it's 100, maybe it's 98, maybe it's 107. I don't know that stuff. But there's 100 senators that are considering the America Competes Act with this amendment buried down deep, on page 3,000 or something, which is basically saying there are 100 people that are about to make a decision for 330 million plus Americans. Okay? So it's down to a very small group are going to make this decision, and it's because the House of Representatives already passed it. It's already slid right through quietly. Okay, so I'm done doing that. Let me get back to the article. The amendments contained in this act, if passed as written, could authorize the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to prevent interstate transport of species listed as injurious and create a whitelist of import-approved species. Animals that are not whitelisted would be considered injurious until whitelisted, which also means that all species must be evaluated individually for consideration of import approval and transportation approval. This transportation clause applies to both transportation into the country as well as interstate transportation from state to state. All the animals that are not whitelisted would be considered injurious until whitelisted. Further, all animals will need to be evaluated individually to be added to the whitelist and would be considered injurious until such evaluation. Animals not whitelisted would not be considered for import and transportation both in the country and across state lines. Additionally, these amendments introduce an emergency powers mechanism which allows for an immediate injunction of no more than 3 years to the importation and transportation of a specific species if an animal is identified as injurious. MASNA, while not a lobbying organization, feels it is of benefit to our membership to continue to provide education and clarification regarding this matter and the technical details within to ensure that our membership is well informed about how legislation like this may affect their ability to continue to enjoy the hobby. Key points regarding this legislation of which MASNA constituents should be aware. There are a few key actions within this legislation that, if enacted, would be of specific interest to our membership. Jack just almost made a light fall over. I was like, okay. White lists or accept/allow lists are lists of what animals are allowed to be imported, which requires that every animal to the species level be added to the list. Currently, the Fish and Wildlife Service has developed and curated detailed taxonomic data for many species in the pet trade like reptiles and birds, but this in-depth information does not exist for fish. Fish are broadly classified, and data on specific species level fish imports as well as their injurious status is currently underreported and or non-existent, which limits USFWS's ability to quickly classify animals as injurious or not. Until a species is added to the accepted list, it will not be allowed to be transported or imported. This whitelist does not only apply to wild-caught animals. Captive bred, maricultured, and aquacultured animals would also have to undergo the same whitelist scrutiny regardless of their source location, even if in the U.S., and regardless of how long before transportation or importation they may have been cultured. Just because an animal is currently being imported safely or is currently being bred and aquacultured in the U.S. does not mean it would be included on the accepted list. Animals that have been successfully imported in the past are not immune to the whitelist scrutiny. Even those animals that have been traded and imported for decades must first be evaluated for whitelist acceptance. Species would only be added to the accepted list after U.S. Fish and Wildlife conducts their evaluation of the animal. If an animal is found non-injurious by a rapid risk screening, the species would then fully need to be researched, have environmental impact statements developed, and be presented for further consideration of being added to the whitelist. This process can typically take 3 to 5 years per species. If all fish species must go through this process, we cannot even begin to comprehend how much time and resources it would require for a proper evaluation and accept list approval of all the species currently in trade. This regulation does not apply to only non-US imports. As this would be federal regulation, it would require 2 levels of scope. First, it would apply to imports coming into the US from out of country. Secondly, if a fish species is deemed injurious in one state in the US, it will be deemed injurious throughout the US. For example, I'm not sure how to say this. Maybe it's a silent P, Pteris sp, which aka the lionfish, which are currently considered injurious and on the invasive species list in Florida due to their introduction into public waters and subsequent ecological harm in the Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic, would not be whitelisted in the US, and their transport would be halted across state lines regardless of their source or their intended destination. While the purpose of this regulation is to limit the trade of injurious animals to protect the nation against ecological and zoonotic threats, the implementation misses the mark. The outcome of this regulation, if enacted, would be an immediate halt of all trade of non-whitelisted marine aquarium animals within the marine aquarium hobby. Threats that are top of mind, including the introduction of zoonotic diseases, while they often originate from situations where animals from disparate regions are housed in close proximity to each other, are not commonplace in a well-maintained and well-managed industry. Legislation that shuts down trade in this way will likely create and reinforce illegal pet trades, which are counterproductive to the underlying goals of actions such as these. So, what can be done? We're near the end. Continue to be good citizens by purchasing livestock from responsible, sustainable, and reputable sources. MASNA's goal is to continue to provide educational opportunities to the marine aquarium hobby public that enlightens and shares best practices to ensure the continued health and well-being of the animals in our care. Be sure to review current and past MASNA educational articles, as well as published MASNA presentations, and use these learnings to better yourself as a hobbyist and contribute to the industry. Consider supporting organizations whose point of view may be similar to yours. There are lobbying organizations who specialize in protecting the pet industry and are fighting for this cause. PJAC, which stands for the Pet Industry Joint Advisory Council, is following this issue and posting updates, and there's a link. Clubs should be aware and knowledgeable of their 501c status when discussing this issue with their senators. But those who have the ability to, within their IRS registration status, can also consider taking a meeting with their local senators when they are in their local offices, an in-person meeting. Hearing firsthand from constituents about their concerns can be impactful. A group of individuals has also started this site, aquariumtrade.org, to collect and facilitate the spread of current information on all trade-related legislative issues, and can be a good starting point for links to the current topics regarding this and other hobby-related topics. All right, so that is the article as of now. So like I said before I started reading all this, there's been misinformation that it's all fine and it was stricken from the record, and that's not true. It's still there, and there's still this 100 people deciding the fate of all the animals in the US besides cats and dogs. I mean, it's everything. So it is something we need to worry about. It is something we have to keep our eyes on, and we have to find out if there's something we can do. Now, there's been some opinions from others that have made recommendations. People with way more money than us individually could do something. And like one of the names that popped up was Petco. And I was like, yes, that makes so much sense. So if Petco or PetSmart, both stores that sell all kinds of animals, suddenly found that the things they want to sell are not on this whitelist, it could really affect their bottom line. So obviously they're going to care a lot about this and make a lot of noise. The bigger the company that's making noise, the better the results of correcting this amendment to make it more palatable to the majority of the hobby. I understand some of why it originally was written. I'm sure, the governor in Florida did not like these giant reptiles falling out of their trees every time it gets cold, and don't like all the lionfish in their waters, and said, that's it, we got to stop these things from ever getting out ever again. But the way it was written, that even though they're unhappy with what's happening in Florida, those of us in Texas that aren't really struggling with it, or Nevada or Seattle, don't have lionfish problems, right? So why can they never have lionfish over there? That makes no sense. So, and that was just one example from this story. But there's so many different animals that are not on the list, and we haven't even started to talk about what happens if you're trying to bring corals in, because we know some corals are injurious and can actually hurt us, put you in the hospital, hurt you. So we do want to stay on top of this one and not ignore it. All right, that is the end of that one, guys. And like I said, I'll put the link later. Let's see, what's next on my list? I have so much on my list. Yeah, that's it. All right, let us go into our topic of the day. So, what do SPS need? Now, I'm going to talk about Acropora care today. As you can see behind me, there are quite a few acros right there. There's one there, and there's one right there, and there's one right over there, and there's one over there. And there's one, and there's a huge one over here. Lots of Acroporas. My tank had way more Acropora in it before the big reset of the reef. And then the potassium deficiency crisis that happened a couple months later wiped out a lot of really choice corals I had. So I'm kind of still feeling like I'm starting from scratch, even though I'm not. And I think in another 3 to 4 months, this is going to look really good. And we'll be able to enjoy it much more. And it'll be nice to do some close-ups of videos and show you where things are going. But when it comes to Acropora, there are very specific things that I feel you need to know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up some notes here about this so I stay on topic and don't wander too hard. I probably should put, well, I mean, you can see acros behind me. Do I need to put a picture of an acro on here? Let me find you one. Let me find you a handy picture of a decent acro. Where is my, okay. Because I did take some nice macro shots, right? All right. Should we pick one that's ridiculously expensive that no one can talk about? Let's talk about this one. This is a good one. Well, look how pretty that is, all right? So that one right there, actually, I'm going to drag it off here for a second. It's that one right there, okay? That's what I'm talking about. Let me put it back on the screen. And it's really pretty. It's the one I say looks fake in my aquarium. This is the KP Staghorn that came from Dwayne in Seattle, and he gave me a nice piece, and it's growing beautifully, and it just looks so vivid that it looks fake. Acropora are very specific. They have very specific needs. They are, at least in the past, we were considered the pinnacle of the hobby. If you could keep SPS alive, you were doing something really well. Compared to a tank that has softies, and we're not making comparisons like you're not good at this or you don't qualify. What I'm saying is that if you have a tank with mushrooms and zoanthids and leather corals and gorgonians and it's pretty and you're happy and there's no effort and you barely have to test, because I know some of you don't like to test, and you find that they just live and grow and they're so pretty and everyone's happy in your household and you're not breaking the bank, that's fine. But there are some people out there that want to go a step further. And so what they do is they buy an LPS coral, like a frog spawn or a hammer or a torch coral. And they say, oh, look, it's so pretty and I love it. And then after a while, they're like, huh, I wonder if there's something else I could put in my tank. And that's when they get the bug for, these things right here, these acros. And Acropora come in so many shapes and styles and growth patterns and colors that they are, very much desired. So when it comes, hang on, lost my spot. There we go. When you're looking at getting an SPS coral like this one here, I'm going to shrink it down a little bit because it's kind of taking over the screen. First thing you do is don't buy an expensive one. Don't start off with something that costs you $100, okay? Just don't do that. I don't care if you liked it that much or that you have $100 to burn. Always start with something. If you've never done this before, start with something that's $5 or $10 and see how you do. So I have said I'm going to talk about Acropora, but I'm going to tell you about other SPS corals that are in the similar vein, which would be Pascilipora or bird's nest. Those are two that are nice, hardy corals that can handle quite a bit as you're learning the ropes of how to take care of this coral. Acropora coral need very specific requirements when it comes to water parameters, flow, and lighting. Those are the three, and even food a little bit. But the first three are going to be water parameters, flow, and lighting. Those three are key to keeping Acropora alive. And there are Acropora that grow in the shape of a pear. There are some that grow out into a bushy tree, like a staghorn. There are some that table out and just make these layers upon layers, and they're really, really pretty. And tabling acros are one of my favorites. And let's see, is there any others? There's none are what you would consider encrusting, like we say with Montipora. Acropora tend to be sticks that grow up and out, and they very rarely grow down. So while you may have a coral on a frag plug, and you may watch the skin grow over the frag plug to hide some of it, if some of that dies off at some point for some reason, which we'll go into, that coral above it will not try to regrow over the dead. It's always moving upward, always growing up. So if you see something turning white at the base, just accept that's how it's going to be, or go in there and do a little dissection and lower the coral down and start anew to get a new base that's encrusting and colorful and not just bone white. But just keep that in mind, because that's a given. We always know the acro is going one direction. And if you had a coral that's tabling outward, I'd say it won't. But I'm going to say possibly rarely. You may have some kind of issue that happens, but almost never does it ever grow backwards back toward the rockwork. It's always growing out. It's growing up, it's growing out. And so your leading edge that tends to be very pale or almost white, that's all new growth. And that is working its way towards you or toward the water, surface. And so if something's happening on the back end of the coral, like I said, a base of an acro may not come back, but also like a tabling coral, the back end against the rock where the glue is, you may have bubble algae, or you may have some kind of issue there, or you may have some die-off. It will not go back and cover that up again. It just doesn't happen. I'm trying to think if there's any way to convince it, and there's not. Corals grow one way. So if it's really bothering you, you would have to remove it from the tank and cut off the area that's white and re-secure it to kind of have a nice looking piece if it was that critical to you. Keep in mind too, if you're doing a good job and the corals are growing, one will be growing over another and creating more and more growth, and it will shade this one, and this one will start to turn white, but all the rest of it's still nice and pretty. And that is very normal in a reef tank. And so if you are, if you've been in the hobby a long time, such as myself and a few other people I'm friends with, when we look at a reef tank, we definitely look at the whole thing, but our eyes immediately see all those spots where that used to be alive, but it's deep down within, and it's you didn't do something wrong. So I wanted to let you know that we're always looking at the colony itself, but where its foundation is to the rockwork, we understand that that's not always going to survive. It becomes part of the foundation of your reef. It becomes your aquascape to some degree. Okay. When it comes to bringing home these corals, the first thing you always want to do is you want to dip them. And it's really important because we don't want pests in our tank. You guys know that I've done my best over the years to dip, and yet last year, but this went on for years and I ignored it. But as I was doing Reef Diaries last year, I shared how I was killing red bugs. I finally dealt with them. I got rid of them. And it was only because I finally got my hands on some interceptor, which is hard to come by. And red bugs, they look like little yellow fleas with red butts, and they were all over these acros, and they bite the acro in their skin, and it makes the polyps suck in, and the coral just doesn't look generally healthy. And by killing off these fleas in your reef tank, the coral can heal and open up and look nice again. And then I'd say, 2 months ago, I shared the bad news that somehow Acropora eating flatworms showed up in my tank, even though it was on one of my oldest corals that I've had for the longest time. And it makes you wonder if possibly, it's just a theory, were the red bugs chowing down on the acro-eating flatworms and keeping them under control? And once I killed off the red bugs, the flatworms could emerge and cause more chaos. Like they were a backup pest, because they weren't on anything new I got. They were on the oldest coral. They were on the Drew's acro. And so I lost more Drew's Acro. But I have one piece about 4 inches long maybe. And I was looking at it, and it's got its color back. I mean, that's a good sign. And I am going to have to blow off all the corals with like a power head or a turkey baster to knock off those. But if you can avoid getting a pest in your tank in the first place, that would be your #1 goal. So any coral you get from any person you get it from, doesn't matter if it's a friend or not. You can't just say, oh, it's from Jason Fox, so I trust it. That's not how this works. A pest is a pest. It can come in on anything, and he might not even realize something snuck in, and then you put it in your tank thinking you're totally fine because it came from a trusted source. Always dip a brand new Acropora when you're putting them in your tank. I usually tell people when you're getting a new coral, you're going to put it through this dip, and it's going to be all perturbed. It's going to be offended. And so you're going to want to go ahead and, get your hands off it as soon as possible. And so rather than taking it from a dipped situation and then holding it in your hand and gluing it to a rock, I always tell people what I recommend you do is you take your brand new dipped coral and you immediately put it down on the bottom of the tank on the sand bed. And so I always say just push the frag plug into the sand bed so the coral's standing upright, and you can observe it for like a week or so and just let it kind of recover from what it just went through. It just went from wherever it came from. It got into a bag. It was either driven in the backseat of a car, or it was shipped to you in a box, or it was in a cooler or whatever. But I mean, it's been through some handling. It's gotten stressed, and then it was bagged up and shaken around, and then you take it out of the bag and you dip it in a chemical, and then you're wanting to glue it to a rock. I mean, there's so much going on. So I always say, dip it, get it in the reef, get your hands off it, leave it alone, and just see how it's doing for a week or two. And then after that couple of weeks, it can kind of recover. And if you need to, you can stand it back up with like some tongs or an acrylic rod, or if you have to, try to use your hands without touching the coral itself and kind of readjust the frag plug. If you use frag racks for some reason, you can put them in those. That'll help it stay upright. But have it down low in the tank where it's getting good laminar flow across it to keep it clean, and just observe for a while. And after a couple of weeks, then you can place it in the tank. And I usually like to put acros about midpoint in the tank. And then after another couple of weeks, then I can move them up to their official place higher up in the reef. I find that that is the best approach with these corals, rather than taking something brand new I got that I love and just stick it on the highest point and say, you're going to be beautiful right there. That's asking a little bit much of a coral that's never been in your water before, dealt with your flow, the type of lighting you are using, at the intensity you have it set at, with the fish that you own, with the whatever toxicities are in your tank that you have not resolved, whether it's a rusting magnet or you're overdosing some product, or you're trying out something new to kill something that actually affects Acropora on the side as a side effect. See, there's so many variables that we want to try and limit as much as we can and just kind of keep it really, really simple. Now, we've talked about getting it in, dipping it, placing it in the tank, and then possibly moving it up after a few weeks or a month. So let's talk about water parameters. Now, if you have a very small tank, let's say you've got this adorable 13-gallon fluval and you just love it, it's perfect, and it can hold 5 beautiful corals. Yes, it can, but it's such a small water volume that things shift really rapidly as anything depletes. So if you have a little evaporation in the tank and you don't top off every single day or even twice a day, the salinity is rising on that tank rapidly. And then as soon as you pour in the water, the salinity drops rapidly. That's why topping off and adding replacement water for evaporation is so important. And so I tell people, if you don't have that automated, then I would highly recommend that you put it in around the time you're feeding the tank, because most people feed their tank every single day to feed their fish. So while you're there putting in fish food, add a little top-off water. If you have a larger tank, larger than 13 gallons, like a 29-gallon, which is what I had my first SPS corals in, I still found that parameter swings were pretty rapid. And even a water change could really change the water parameters drastically. Yes, it's cleaning the water, it's making the water better with a water change, but the alkalinity of the new water versus the alkalinity of the tank may not be the same. And if you're not matching those two before the water change, you could just suddenly suck down the alkalinity. You could accidentally push the pH up too high. You could, like I said before, affect salinity. I mean, there's a few different variables. And then there's things that we don't even test for that comes in our salt mixes that should, in theory, be good for our tank. So Nothing wrong with water changes. I'm just pointing out that keeping the water stable for an SPS coral like an Acropora, you have to have more insight and more forethought. You have to really think about the logistics of what you're doing to make sure that you're providing the best water possible for that coral to maintain the same numbers it's used to day after day after day. So if we are using RODI water instead of tap water, we're already ruling out all the stuff that comes out of the pipes. That's a good first step. And if you're using a well, I still would recommend going to an RODI to take out any kind of metals and to purify that water. We want to just get down to the purest of water because Acropora like really clean water. They really, really do. Then we want a trusted salt mix. And this year we've already had reports about one salt mix that, let's just say it's been in the social media news that it was lacking things or it included something that was not right. You heard about my salt mix last year that had a problem. There was I can almost think of every salt mix on the market over the last 25 years has had some kind of report of some bad buckets or bad batch that got out, and unfortunately some of our tanks were affected. And the corals that die, the fish that die, the issues that arise, the weird things that grow, these are all, it's just part of the hobby. And unfortunately there's certain things we absolutely cannot control unless you are literally making your own salt mix yourself with your own ingredients and actually building the mix yourself in a giant, with a witch's cauldron, cooking it up, right? But we buy mixes and we expect them to always be the same year after year. And, when Kent had a bad batch of salt and it went across the nation and caused chaos, I had 6 buckets of that stuff, which was hundreds of dollars, right? I guess, I don't know, a couple, $200-300 worth of salt. And I just let them know I had the bad salt, and they sent me 6 new buckets. And I continued to use it. I didn't suddenly say, I'll never use that salt again because a bad batch came out into the US. Later on, I used Fritz, and people were complaining about Fritz and the way the alkalinity works, which is kind of a weird oddity for me. But they kept fine-tuning the recipe. But that initial damage was done where a lot of people were just gun-shy and concerned. And again, if you're trying to keep SPS corals, you need your salt to be consistent, box after box after box, right? So as far as I know, there's nothing wrong with Fritz salt. I was using Aquavitro, salinity, and I've been using it for 5 years. I had a bad barrel. It definitely hurt my tank. They sent me a new barrel. And I had also bought a new barrel during all this happening and found out that my new barrel is completely safe. And then they sent me a new one to replace the bad one. And they sent me some corals because I didn't yell at them. That's the honest answer. I mean, I didn't go and just rip them a new one. I said to them, I think this is a problem. I want to bring it to your attention and, prove me wrong. And in the end, they said, we'd like to get you some corals because of the way you handle this. I'm like, all right, thank you. And they gave me some nice little frags. So we've got good water and we've got a salt mix we want to trust. I'm saying that with a little smile because eventually something's going to go wrong because everything's made by humans and we're imperfect and we make little tiny mistakes from time to time and it affects others around us. But if we have a salt mix we're going with and we're trusting it, then the next thing you need is a series of test kits you trust because you need to test your water. And this goes to my whole water test Saturday, test everything every Saturday, and I always list all the parameters. I always tell you guys, test alkalinity, calcium, magnesium. I'm actually saying it now in advance so I don't have to say it later. We want to test salinity, temperature, we want to know pH, we want to know phosphate, nitrate. These are the big ones we care about for an established reef tank that we're trying to keep happy week after week, month after month, year after year. We want to be so successful that we have to trim our corals because there's no space left in the tank. That's what we want. And if you are putting in things and they're dying and you're putting in more things and they're dying, you are not staying on top of your husbandry. Something isn't right. You have not determined the cause of the issue, and putting more coral in is not the solution. We want to figure out what caused the death of the coral, make the corrective measures, and then try another coral and see what happens. And keep in mind too, just put this in the back of your mind. You may have no luck with a certain coral. That doesn't mean keep buying it. That coral may not be the one for your tank. It may never grow in your tank. That may be the one you can't have. So let's say, for example, you really liked Acropora tenuis, which is like a lot of the nickname ones, like Walt Disney and like Homewrecker. These are tenuis acros. They're kind of finicky. Well, they're very finicky. And you may be able to keep a green Slimer alive perfectly or a blue Tort perfectly, but you cannot keep a Walt Disney alive to save your life. Stop buying Walt Disney. Just stop. Don't do it. And then maybe 2 years from now, you might say, you know, I'll try one more and see what happens this time. And maybe whatever was in your system that was a hindrance will have dissipated. Maybe you switched out. I mean, I'm just throwing out random crazy ideas here. This is not based on anything I've read. But what if you replaced one protein skimmer with another protein skimmer, and this one either is more efficient or is just made of a different material that doesn't pollute the water that kills Walt Disney acros? See, I mean, it could be something as mundane as the plastic on the pump, okay? I mean, sometimes there's something that we never do identify that's causing a little bit of chaos that affects one thing in our tank. But as long as everything else in your tank is doing well, don't be too hard on yourself. Don't beat yourself up. And don't keep buying it and killing it. Just get what works, expand a little bit, take your time. That one I have to say again. Take your time because there's no race when it comes to reef keeping. You want to enjoy it. You want to maintain stability. You want to make very small, gradual changes. You want to watch things grow in over time. And you want to lower your own frustration level, okay? If you go in there and you drop in 25 frags, there's a good chance you could lose 20 of them, okay? I mean, it can happen for a variety of reasons, and we'll get into that. But we want to really focus on keeping those parameters really locked in. So for example, let's just talk about alkalinity because that's one of the most important numbers in my mind. Recently, there's been discussion that pH is more important than I thought, but I'm going to still lean on my old school alkalinity belief. So if Mike is listening, I apologize, Mike. If you like your tank to be at 8.5, if that is your number, then we want to stay at 8.5, 8.6, 8.4, 8.5, 8.5, 8.5, 8.6, 8.65, 8.5, 8.5. You know, we want to be at that number week after week throughout the whole year. We do not want to be up at 11 and down at 7 and then finally get back to 8.5 and then suddenly you're at 9.5. You're like, how did that happen? And then you're at 6 because you ran out of solution and didn't check on your dosing pump. These are mistakes you should not be making. These are part of your daily duties of keeping track of what's going on with your tank. And we want to make sure alkalinity is consistent day after day. Now, the nice thing is alkalinity tests are the cheapest test and the fastest test compared to all the other tests we do. I mean, of everything we do, alkalinity is so easy. Tropic Marin makes a great kit. Hanna Checker is really simple if you want to use that. I'm using Elos. I'm trying to think who else is easy. Well, those three right there are, so maybe Salifert is easy too. I can't remember. I haven't used that in so long. But alkalinity is just so quick. You learn the kit by heart. You just know it's, you know, this much liquid, this many drops, boom, color change. What's my number? It's that simple. You don't have to wait for anything. And if you use a Smart Stir that I've been recommending to you guys, those are back in stock. If you use a Smart Stir, you put the vial inside this magnetic stirrer that is charged up with a battery inside of it, and you just put in your 5 milliliters of water, because it's usually 5 milliliters for any test kit when it comes to alkalinity. And then you put the little bead inside, and you turn it on so it's spinning, and you just count the drops as you're dropping, and it's doing all the mixing. You're not shaking a vial like this with the other hand, trying to squeeze drops into a bottle. Into a vial. It's so nice. I love the Smart Stir. I highly recommend it. I keep them in stock. I think they're $30, $35 on my website. And I have like a dozen. If you haven't bought one yet, you're making a huge mistake. Give me your money. You know the saying, take my money? Give me your money. Buy the Smart Stirrers. Get them off my shelf so that you can enjoy them. I'll buy more. I'll keep bringing them in because I feel like they are one of the best water testing tools you could own to make your life simple because you can use it with all your kits. Now, if you're a Hanna Checker person, then you probably don't need the Smart Stirrer. Maybe. It just depends what Hanna does not make a clamshell device for. But, you know, I really love that thing. It's fantastic. And before I had that, I had a 3D printed one from a friend, an online friend who shipped it to me as a gift. And I used that for years and years and did a video about it on this channel. And when the Smart Stir came out, I was like, oh my God, it's so much even prettier than what I had. So I went ahead and I've been using it ever since. And I love that thing. I charge it like once every 2 months, and I use it every single week for 9 tests. And if I test 2 tanks, it's 18 tests. So I mean, it's really getting a lot of use. Let me pause here for 1 second. My dog needs to go outside. Here we go. All right. Now, I'm going to talk about each of these parameters because they're really important. We're done with alkalinity. I just want to say whatever the number is you pick, that is what you live by. The range that we generally pick is between 8 and 11 DKH. So if you tend to run higher phosphates and higher nitrates, the higher DKH is fine, and you can run that. You can have it at 11 all the time, but stay at 11. If you are running low nutrients where you have almost no phosphate and almost no nitrate, you're going to want a lower number like 8 and keep it at 8 all the time. Okay? But somewhere in that range, I tend to like 9 all the time. That's my thing. And currently right now today, my tank is 9.1. Okay? So I'm really close to my 9. The next number we care about is calcium, and calcium is another one that we yeah, I don't want to talk about that yet. Calcium, we have a goal range of 375 to 450. So you want to be somewhere in there. We do not want to be at 500, 550, okay? So if your calcium is too high, you need to take a break from dosing that part of your 2-part and just let the tank get down to 375 to 450. My tank tends to be 400 all the time, forever. Very rarely do I see it get higher than 400. I don't actually physically dose calcium. I have a calcium reactor that is actually, by definition, an alkalinity reactor, but it does give my tank calcium, and my calcium never wavers. It's always, always, always 400. So you want to keep your calcium 375 to 450, somewhere in that spot. And you want to stay there, okay? Don't go too high, don't go too low. If, and I saw this, I think it was asked in Club Miller's Reef, should put that on the screen too, shouldn't I? So now it's on top of my face. Let me drag some things over here. Oh, try it again. Oh, it won't let me. Wow. All right. Huh. Okay, I'll scoot my thing over. Someone asked in Club Miller's Reef, my calcium's 200. How much can I add to safely bring it up to 400? And several of us immediately said, go get your water tested again by someone else. Find out that that number is true before you start dosing. Because what if you're doing the kit wrong, or the kit has expired, it's just a false reading, and you start dosing a bunch more, you're going to push the calcium much too high. We don't want to do that. So if you ever have a really weird, wonky number, the first step you should do is go to someone else, if you can, a hobbyist that's a friend of yours, that's in the local area, and have them test your water with their kits, or go to your fish store. Even if they charge you for the testing, just pay it to verify. And that way you can find out for sure before you make any changes with your tank, because if you just we don't want to make mistakes, okay? And we definitely don't want to make a mistake based on a false reading. So the next test that we want to look into would be magnesium. And the ocean measures 1280 ppm, 1280 ppm. Basically, the rule of thumb when it comes to magnesium is that magnesium should be 3 times the level of your calcium. So if your calcium is 400, your magnesium should be 1200. If your calcium is 425, you should be 1275. So you can see how the correlation between calcium and magnesium, those numbers, now you see why those numbers exist. And it's kind of an interesting number to keep in mind. So if you want, I generally tell people when it comes to magnesium, I like to run it a little bit heavier. I like to have it at 1300 as my baseline. That's my low point. But I generally shoot for 1400. And the reason I shoot for 1400 is because the Acropora don't mind the higher magnesium, but the Montipora love magnesium. And so I want to make sure that they have plenty of magnesium in their in the water that they can draw from. And magnesium tends to last a long time in your tank before it suddenly depletes. So you dose the tank, you get it up to 1400, and even if you don't dose it for weeks, you might stay at 1400 all the time. You're like, wow, it doesn't even budge. And it may not budge for a while. It may not budge for months. That used to be the case on my 280-gallon Reef. I could pour in a 2-liter bottle of liquid magnesium into my system and get the number up. I didn't have to do it for like 3 months again. And then I had to put in another 2 liters. And that was before we had dosing pumps and got all fancy. But in this tank, I have to dose magnesium daily. I don't know why. I really don't know the difference. I don't understand. My reef keeping habits are the same. All I did was change from a 280-gallon to a 400-gallon. But the 280, which was filled with SPS and lots of monopora, and then I set up this one. And this one, I have to put in 80 milliliters of magnesium daily. I fill up a jug that's almost a gallon every single month, mix it up, and it just trickles it in every single day at the exact same time. And I think I heard it this morning. I heard a funny noise because I'm usually not up that early. And it was dosing magnesium into the system, and I could hear it. And so I went and take a look to actually see it happen. And the magnesium was dumped in. So when I test my water, I'll see what that one is. Now, phosphates, the goal is always 0.03 is the number that has been said forever. I would just say that is a great goal. We definitely don't want 0 phosphate. 0.03 is super low, okay? It really is. If you're 0.06, that's still low enough. You're not going to start growing hair algae abundantly. You don't have to fear the tank is going to, just fall apart on you because you have a little bit of phosphate. Phosphate's okay. It is the one element I never really stress about. I just use phosphate or X when I need it to bring it way down from where it is, which in my tank could be 0.5, 0.75. I'm like, okay, let me knock it down again. And I bring it all the way back down to below 0.1. 1 second. Jack, I'm doing a live stream. Quit interrupting. Okay. So if you're not a member of Club Milos Reef, you are welcome to join. It's facebook.com/groups/MilosReef. Turn that off. Turn that off. All right. Nitrate. Generally speaking, the lower the nitrate, the better your SPS corals will do, especially Acropora. And in general, you want to be less than 5 ppm. I generally tell people 10 ppm and below should work for most Acropora colonies. There may be some specialty ones, some really high-end, classy ones with a very fancy nickname that had a very hefty price tag, and they may like it even lower. But most of these corals can adapt. You may just, the better your water parameters are and the more stable it is, the more consistent it is, the more likely you'll maintain the colorfulness of the corals that made you buy them, okay? But if your numbers are skipping around and you're not staying on top of top off and you're letting dosing pumps clog up and you're running out of solutions and you're not adding things that you're supposed to be adding, you're not doing your water changes, you're going to have, or your pollutants just get really high in the tank, you're going to watch these really colorful sticks turn brown, turn green. And literally the skeleton inside the Acropora, if you break it in half, it's green all the way through. That's actually called green boring algae. It bored into the skeleton and changed it from white to green because there's so much nutrient in the water. So we don't want to do that with our tanks. We want to make sure we're keeping these numbers there. A very important thing that's not a chemical would be temperature. And you want to have a very, very consistent temperature in the tank for your Acroporas to keep them happy. And while there is a range of temperature, again, it's sort of like the alkalinity when I talked about somewhere between 8 and 11, pick a spot in there and stay there. Same thing with temperature. I would not keep Acropora in a tank that's colder than 76 Fahrenheit. Okay, so I would just keep it at, I keep my tank 77.5 to 78.5. That's where it is. So that is my range. My range is about 1.3 degrees per day. So in a 24-hour period, there is that variance of just over a degree swing. Back when I had metal halides, my degree swing was about 2.5 degrees a day. Forever. It was always like that. The corals adapted. They just knew that's how it was. Now, if something really went wrong and the tank got really, really hot, I lost corals because of it, because it was too much. They couldn't handle it. You do not want to have corals in a tank where the tank cools off like crazy at night because you have your climate control set up weirdly in your home, and then warm all the way up to where they belong during the daytime. They can definitely not handle a 7-degree shift, okay? So, for example, if your tank gets down to like 73 at 3 in the morning, and then, the peak of the day, it's 84. That is really bad. That's even more than 7 degrees. That's like 11 degrees. We don't want to do that. We want to keep our tanks the same temperature at night, in the morning, in the afternoon. That means, when does your heater come on? When does your heater come off? Does your heater turn off because you left the home because you have a smart thermostat where it senses no people, and so it's lowering the house temperature a couple of degrees, which is lowering your tank temperature a couple of degrees? Are you doing things where you're cooking and really warming up the room? Are you running a fireplace that really warms up the room? Are you running the AC too long when it should have cycled off, but it kept going and going because you just kind of set it to a low number? These are the things that can affect a reef tank in that home or in your office. And especially offices, a lot of those things, the thermostat, not only is it locked behind a locked cover, but they also may have some kind of programming to where you can't even adjust it. Or they may even disable it over the weekend because they're open Monday through Friday. And Saturdays and Sundays, the reef tank is just dealing with whatever minimal temperature the office is supplying to the entire building. So you want to know what those are. And that's why having heaters in your system and having a chiller in your system can help you to regulate these wild changes in the ambient temperature of the room that your aquarium is in. And SPS corals and acroporas really want stable temperatures. Where they live in the ocean, it's the same temperature all the time. I mean, the variance is so minor, the fluctuation is so minimal. It's probably why they grow so well in the ocean, where we don't have to help them. Now, with global warming, they've talked about how the entire Earth has gone up a degree, and I kept thinking 1 degree. What's 1 degree? Well, they're talking about 1 degree Celsius, which is more than a degree in my brain. And just think about it this way: if you haven't, the average temperature of the human body is 98.6. That's considered healthy. So, if 1 degree Celsius is like 2 degrees Fahrenheit, instead of being 98.6, you're 100.6. How do you feel? See? And that's inside of you. Now, we're talking about the water that's encircling the coral. And the coral's used to 76 degrees or something like that, or 78 degrees. But we're letting our tank get up to 84 because the sun is coming through the windows and cooking the tank for a couple of hours in the morning because it's not daylight savings time yet. That kind of stuff can happen. And we want to make sure that we are protecting from all outside forces so that our water temperature is always the same. Now, people might have an aquarium with a sticky thermometer on the front where you can just glance at it and see what the temperature is every time you look at the tank. That's fine. That's better than 0. Others may have a glass thermometer they stick in the tank. Others may have a device they put in the water, and while they're holding in the water, it tells them temperature and salinity, for example, and they know that instant what the temperature is, but they don't know what all the other instances of a 24-hour period are because they aren't standing there for 24 hours watching this thing fluctuate. So we want to know what the temperature is. You might want to do something like buy the big temp alert. If you wanted like a huge thermometer stuck up on the wall above the tank, I mean, the thing's like, it's big. It's a big, huge square thing. And there's a set of numbers on the top and a set of numbers on the bottom. And one thermometer is the ambient of the room. So you could glance up there and say, hey, my room is 78 degrees. And then the bigger number on the bottom should have the word out next to it. And out means there's a wire for an outside temperature. The idea with the big temp alert probably was initially, it was a way for people to have a thermometer near a door or window, and they'd snake the wire outside, and they could look at the big temp alert, and they could see inside the house is 76 degrees, and outside is 107. That's the out. That's the out wire. Well, that wire goes in your aquarium, and it would tell you what the temperature of the water is in your aquarium, even though the word out is on the display. But you would learn that, and I remember when I first got it, I kept looking at the top number, and I kept thinking that was my temperature, and I was completely wrong. It took me a while to know. I was like, oh my God, I've been looking at the wrong number the whole time. So if you get the big temp alert, you look at the out, that is the one that's measuring your tank. And you want to see what it is. Look at it every time you walk past the tank. Look in the morning, look at night. You get up at 3 in the morning to pee, look at your tank. You get up early because you got to rush off and fight rush hour traffic. It's 5 a.m., look at the tank. And just see what those numbers are to see if they're being consistent. And then, if you're a big spender like me and you get an aquarium controller, you can literally open up an app on your phone and you can see the temperature every 15 minutes for the last week. And you can see the graphs, and you can see when it gets cold, and you can even verify, did the heaters come on and how long were the heaters running? And that's all the stuff I do all the time. I'm always looking to make sure that everything's working the way it should, so that way my stuff will stay alive. I did not mention potassium when it came to water testing. So potassium is a really important element. I learned the hard way. Forever, I did not care about this thing. I didn't think about this thing. And then last year, when I was missing tons of it, I found out how important it was. Potassium should be a minimum of 400 in your salt mix, okay? So if your salt mix is testing in at 360, 340, something low, you need to be dosing potassium too for your SPS corals. So we definitely don't want to forget that one. That's a new one, so that's why I'm not surprised I forgot to mention it. All right, lighting, another huge topic when it comes to Acropora corals. How are we doing on time? We're an hour in. Yeah, I think we're all right. Lighting used to be, the simplest thing was metal halide, okay? You just bought these metal halides and you put them over your tank and you made sure the bulb was, here's the water, and the bulb was about here, which was 9 to 12 inches off the surface. And that's where the bulb was. And you would get all this light into your tank. And we really, I mean, while we understood it would add heat to the room, we understood it would add heat to the aquarium, we felt it was necessary to grow corals. And then after, I don't even know how many years, the T5 bulbs came out, which are the skinny little bulbs that came in lots of different colors. And people started using those to grow corals, but they could see the difference. You could see a tank that was T5 versus a tank with metal halides, and you knew which one they were, okay? There was no doubt in your mind. You know, with metal halides, you had shimmer, and you had lots of growth. And it really came down to which color bulb you would buy, because you had to get the right color for your entire aquarium. And if you had a smaller aquarium that needed one bulb, like a 2-foot wide tank, or you had a larger aquarium that maybe it's 40 inches or 48 inches or 60 inches or 72 inches long, you may needed 2 or 3 bulbs, and you had to buy 3 bulbs. And when you're shopping for metal halide bulbs back in the day, there were some choices, and most of us bought the 10,000 Kelvin bulb. Okay, that was kind of where that was your baseline. It was white with a hint of blue. And we grew corals like no one's business. We could grow corals left and right and fill our tanks up with beautiful colonies. And I just recently shared a post from Michael Paletta, who is a well-known aquarist and a public speaker. And he showed pictures of corals that we kept 25 years ago under those metal halides. So if you did not see that on the Mila's Reef page, go to facebook.com/Mila's Reef. Not in the club, but on my business page. And it's one of the most recent posts I put up. And in that post, you will see a whole bunch of pictures he shared from one tank. He's actually been sharing something like this, I don't know, for the last few weeks. He's been going on memory lane, finding all these old pictures and sharing them with the world and telling us backstories. So most of us had 10K lighting, 10,000 Kelvin. Some people wanted 12. Some people wanted 14,000. And then there was a few lunatics out there that wanted 20,000 Kelvin. Those are the ones where the tank was completely blue. And mostly, people did not run their tanks with 20K blue. Most of them came in somewhere around 14,000, 15,000. The Phoenix 15K or 14K was very popular. The Reef Lux 14K was very popular. Before that, we had Ushio, which has been around forever. It was like the Cadillac of metal halide bulbs. Everyone wanted Ushio. But we always felt there wasn't enough blue. And so we would supplement with some VHO lighting to throw a little blue in the tank to compensate for all the white light that we were throwing at our corals that were growing corals left and right. 10 years ago, I guess, people started leaning into LEDs. And maybe more, maybe 12 years ago. And a lot of it, no one knew what they were doing. They just grabbed different diodes and tried stuff. And some people built them, and some people bought them from overseas. And eventually companies like Aqua Illumination, Ecotech, Orphec, there was a few brands that came out. I know Reef Koi had their own private label of something from overseas for a while. And there were just these LED fixtures that had 2 knobs. And maybe one turned on the whites, one turned on the blues. Or maybe it was just like, maybe it just turned up and turned down, but you set it like volume control and then you left it alone and you plugged it into a mechanical timer and it turned on and it turned off. There was no ramping up. There was no ramping down. There was no AB plus schedules. There was no cloud cover. There was no lightning strikes. There was none of that stuff was happening. There was no changing spectrums throughout the day and changing and transitioning into beautiful, deep blue hues late into the night. Your lights were on, your lights were off, and we grew corals. Nowadays, lots of people are getting these aquariums that are new to them. They've not had reef tanks before. They're getting corals, and they may be getting SPS, and they get some fancy light fixture, and they barely understand how to use the app for that light fixture. And they ask everyone, how am I supposed to set this? And then people just say, do this. And they are saying, do this based on their own personal experience, what's working for them. But what works for Steve may not work for Mary because there's so many variances from tank to tank. So there's a lot of debate about lighting of the aquarium. Now myself, the tank you're looking at behind me right now, I'm going to turn off this acro because we're kind of done with it. This tank has been under Sky, which is Neptune's version of LED lighting. And it has been, let's see if I can change it for a different color here. Let me change it to 100% everything. So you see, it still looks pretty blue to you guys. So I'll change it to my streaming setting that I like. So there you got some colors that look kind of realistic. And to the naked eye, I've mentioned this before, it actually isn't pretty at all. It's kind of ugly. But this works for the camera, for the lens, for the way it's processed through the streaming software. So growing your tank under white lighting, people are now saying with conviction, you don't need white. And white is only for yourself. And that the corals need blue. And the ocean is blue. And the corals come from blue water. And I disagree. Okay? So rather than get into a heated debate and argue the semantics about 420 nanometers and all that kind of stuff, I recommend people run some white light every single day and run some blue light every single day. The beauty of the LED fixtures that we have these days is you can literally program it to be different spectrums at different intensities every single day with a nice schedule you can live with. But to start your tank off with dim blue lighting and then go to brighter blue lighting and stay blue all day and then dim down to nothing and then finally have a moonlight in blue, you don't need blue all the time. Blue is nice. Blue is not necessary all the time. Blue is not the success for growing corals that some people are saying. It's not true. And I know there's going to be people who are going to get on my YouTube and yell at me now for saying that. You can have blue and you can grow corals, yes. But I bet you if I switch all my lights to white for like the next 3 months, I will have ginormous colonies where if you just keep running your blues for the next 3 months, you will not have ginormous colonies. It grows slower in blue light. It's a totally different spectrum. And the corals, their DNA is wired to grow with a certain light that they receive out of the ocean, or from the sunlight into the ocean every day. And then we put them in our tanks under artificial lighting, and we have some people that say this is what you need, and so people just do what they're told. But you can experiment a little bit, okay? And you can definitely try out some white light and see if you can tolerate it. It doesn't bother me at all. For me to look at my tank with white light makes me feel like I'm at the beach looking at the coral reef that's 30 feet down. We don't get corals that are from 150 feet down where it's going to be way dimmer and way less white light. We are getting corals from 10 feet, 15 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet. Maybe they're diving down for stuff at 80 feet, but I kind of doubt it. I think most of the stuff we get is 60 and above, and it ain't that blue down there, people. I'm telling you, it's not. And our lights are the same intensity every single day, right? You programmed it to whatever you picked. Say you picked 75%. In nature, there are cloudy days, and there could be cloudy weeks, and the corals don't die. They keep living. They survive with less light. And then the sun comes in and they get pounded with white light. And some of the other colors too. Anyway, Nothing wrong with white. White definitely does grow corals. White, as far as I understand it, is the combination of all the colors, including blue. It's just in there. And when I switch this light on this tank to 100% all 4 channels, it looks like white lighting to me. And I've had people say, wow, that looks really nice. And it actually, it's the right white with a little hint of blue look that the Reef is really pretty. But I don't run my tank at 100%. I only do it when I show it to someone and I do the switch for 10 minutes. My lighting is at 65% for the peak of the day. And when I say the peak of the day, my lighting does this. It goes up and stays and then comes down and down. It's a bell curve. And that's how my light is every single day, a bell curve. Because when I think my way through how the sun works and how the earth works, I realize the sun is a fixed point in the sky, okay? But I'm going to explain this from the earth's point of view. If you have a reef tank right here and the sun is coming up from the east and it's going down to the west, when the sun is right here, there's not as much light hitting that coral as it is when the sun is right here above the coral, shining straight down. And then as the sun continues to travel over here and get further and further down the apogee to the horizon line, there's less light. So your coral is getting some light here to here mainly. This is the big one. This is what I like to call high noon. And I like to have that high noon area be about 3-4 hours a day where it just gets really good intensity. But the ramping down and the ramping up, that is really just for me, for enjoyment. So how long should you run your lights per day? There's going to be the general feel, 12 hours a day, but that's not right. I usually tell people your lighting period that you're really growing things should be about 7 hours a day, maybe 8 hours a day, plus ramping up and ramping down, which might put you at 12 hours for a total cycle, but not flip the lights on and cook the corals for 12 hours and flip the lights off. We don't want to do that. That is just too much. And then the other thing, you know, when we're talking about the duration of how long the light should run is the intensity. So if you're running your lights at 90%, or let's say you're running them at 100%, you may not want to run them for 8 hours straight. You may want to have those lights on for 6 hours because you're hitting them with so much light at one time that you shorten the period. But if you're using less light, you can extend your day longer. And this is something that's been proven for the last 15, 20 years. This is not something that only has to do with LEDs. I mean, people with metal halides are doing this stuff too. And there were always some people that had the super long days, and then you had the other people that did much shorter days where they do like 4 hours and then no lights for 8 hours and then 4 hours again because they were on some split shift with their job and they only wanted a few hours during the daytime. Or I know California had some of these crazies. I know, just saying California and crazies, those go hand in hand anyway. But I used to live there, so I get to play with, make fun of California a little bit. But because the electric rate is so high, it was cheaper to use electricity after a certain hour of the day. Like I think it was after 6 p.m., the rates went way down. So people would run the reef tank from like 6:30 p.m. to like 1 in the morning instead of running it 9 to 5 or 9 to 7 or whatever. They just chose to run their schedule at night. And then, like I said, there's some people that have to work third shift. And so they wanted the lights on for a few hours before they went to work, which might be from like 9 o'clock at night to 1 in the morning. They go to work at 2. And then they had their lights turn off and they'd be at work for the next 8 or 9 hours. And they'd come home and the lights were on for 3 or 4 hours before they went back to bed. And they would do a split cycle, which is crazy. I don't even know how the fish and the corals could adapt to 2 daytimes in one day. That's kind of weird to me. But like I said, there are going to be some people that are going to do things a little bit differently. For a very long time, I ran a staggered lighting schedule. I ran it for about 10 years. I just stumbled across that article again yesterday where I ran the first light from 1 o'clock to 7 o'clock. The second light came on from 2:15 to 8:15, and the third line came on at 3:30 to 9:30. So each light was on for about 6 hours. And from 3:30 to 7, all the lights were on. So I had 3.5 hours of high noon with all the lights on at the same time. But then, as soon as 7 o'clock hit, that light turned off. This side of the reef was a little darker. And then at 8:30, this light turned off. And all you had on was this one light. Just a little light here. Well, a lot of light, right? One light. And the rest of the tank was dimmer. And then finally it would turn off and I'd only have VHOs, or later on I had XHOs, which are the LED blue equivalents. And I could enjoy the reef for the blueness that it was, but all those other period of hours, I had lots of growth from that schedule where I made my day longer by having the sun move across the reef throughout the day. So if you want to do staggered lighting, I can include that article in the video description as well if you're interested. I had someone just ask me, I think the last live stream, am I running staggered lighting now? And I said no. And part of the reason is because I was using an LED light for the first time, an LED fixture from Neptune for the first time. I've been running Radions and on my other tanks for years. But I thought, this time I've been doing staggered lighting for 10 years. I'll just do the whole tank at once. It'll be more normal. People will understand it more. And I wanted to keep explaining myself. But who knows? Maybe one day I'll say, I kind of miss the staggered lighting. I might go back to it. But as pertaining to this conversation about SPS corals, we want to find the right amount of intensity for the right duration to keep the Acropora alive. And we definitely don't want to use so much that we cook the corals, and we don't want to use not enough to where they struggle. We want to make sure we're finding that sweet spot. So one of the ways to know how much lighting to use would be to rent, borrow, or own a par meter, which you can then put a sensor in your tank and you can measure where that coral is and see what it's getting. And you can compare it to other people's par measurements and say, hey, I have this green slimer. What par do you tend to keep that at? Because yours is really pretty. And they said, oh, mine's an 800. You're like, oh, okay, I only get up to 550. I'm like, yeah, that's why yours doesn't grow so fast. Try something for me. Try something for me. Instead of blue light, switch that light to white light and measure the par at that green slimer again. You might see it's like 700 or 750 because the white light is more intense. So again, the spectrum matters, the duration matters, the intensity matters, and getting it all just right, you have to do a little bit of experimenting, you have to do a little bit of research, and you have to do a little bit of learning. And it's going to take some time, and there's nothing instantaneous about a reef tank. So you're going to have to find that information, and you're going to fine-tune your husbandry, and you will actually become better with more and more experience. The more you are trying to keep these animals alive, and the more you're trying to grow things. So rather than being frustrated, just kind of understand this is going to be difficult. And just because 7 people say, oh, it's no big deal, there's probably 20 people say it's actually kind of hard. Realize this is going to be a learning curve for you as well, and you're going to have to find what works best. And you may discover that you've got the perfect lighting, and everything's doing really well except for one coral. Well, that one coral may need to move down or up or away from a different neighbor entirely. It could be completely chemical related and nothing to do with everything else in the tank, and that this guy's just attacking that guy. And you didn't even know because you weren't looking at your tank at 3 in the morning to see if it had sweepers coming out stinging its neighbor. Or it could just be that coral. I mean, I've got this one here at the peak of my tank, right behind my head. My head's in the way. Right there. And that thing is so ugly. And I need to move it down. I think if I move it down, it's going to be much prettier. Even though it came from a tank with a lot of light, and I've had it for a long time. I've had it 6-7 months now, right? And it's only pretty under blue lighting at the right perspective, which is like looking down through a viewer. So that's kind of pointless. If you can't just enjoy the coral, I got to move it. And so I'm going to move it down a little bit. I think I'm going to get it to a different spot to where it doesn't look just like this mostly white stick. It's kind of crazy. It's because it's actually got a lot of color in it, but I think it's just getting too much light in that one spot. I think it's a hot spot, and I got to move it away from there. Now, putting a PAR sensor there, I can measure it, and then I can find another spot I think might work and measure that, and then I can use education, an educated guess, and say, okay, well, it's sitting at 410. I'm going to try it in a spot that's 345 and leave it there for 3 weeks or 3 months and see what happens. And if it starts to color up and look a little bit better, I'll know it was getting baked too much light. Okay? Okay. I told you earlier, if you buy 25 frags at once, it may not go so well. I'm sure there are people out there. I mean, I've done it. I've planted a bunch of corals in one day before. I've done it. It can be done, but it's not recommended. It's usually best to do things in small groups at a time for a couple of reasons. If you buy a bunch of Acropora and you have to dip a bunch of Acropora, like when Dwayne shows up at my house with 25 pieces, I have to literally move 25 pieces through a dip that is no longer than 15 minutes. And most people will put a coral in a dip and they start the timer and then the thing goes beep, 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 and you take the coral out and you blow it off or you study it, and you move it into either the tank or into a rinse bowl of water. But all the rest of the frags are still sitting in there, and the timer elapsed already. It's already done. So now it's been 17 minutes, and you reach in to get the next one, and you're cleaning it off, and you're cutting off the frag plug, and you see some Valonia, or you spot a vermitid, and you call your friend, like, oh my God, can you believe this? And these corals are sitting in 23 minutes in the dip. And then you finally pull out another one. And it could be 45 minutes that the last one has been sitting in the dip versus the first one that got out in 15. And you said, I don't know why that one coral died. Because you cooked it in the dip? So, if you're going to dip corals, dip them in batches and get them out of the chemical into rinse water when the timer is done. If the dip solution instructions say 8 to 10 minutes, use 8 to 10 minutes. If it says 15, use 15. If you're nervous, use 7. And then maybe look at them and then decide, do you want to dip again or something? But the thing is, don't overdo it and don't leave them in too long. And then when you take them out and you move them into that rinse bowl, that's really a good, smart way to do it. You may have a bucket, like a 2-gallon bucket, and you have all the frags in there. Maybe you have them on a round frag rack sitting in the bucket, right? With a handle. And then when the timer has gone off, you've been turkey basting and you took a power head or whatever, you could lift the handle out and put it in bucket number 2 of tank water and rinse them all immediately. And they're sitting in tank water with a little residue of the chemical, and you can kind of deal with them one by one. But again, we don't want to have them sit in the bucket so long. The water gets cold, the frag gets cold, and then you take that cold frag and put it in your warmer tank. Everything has to move in succession. So from dip to rinse to tank, temperature should be stable throughout. Duration of chemical exposure should be limited to how long it's supposed to be. And then main handling. Remember, I told you don't handle it much. So if you can immediately just get it onto a spot in your tank, that'd be great. If you want to put it in a quarantine tank, if that's your thing, that's fine too. Of course, that quarantine tank has to be super stable all the time too. And then last, I want to say, any Acropora that you place in your tank should be secure. If you have a coral that's rocking back and forth, the flow is just doing this, and it's just acting like a metronome, right? Just tapping to the flow, and it won't grow as fast as it will if it's stationary. So using super glue gel or using 2-part putty that you knead together into a uniform color and then putty the coral into place on the rock so it stays rigid, it will grow, 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 grow. But if it's wiggling in the flow, it will grow much slower because it's, let's just call it stressed. It's wiggling. It doesn't want to wiggle. Acroporas are not wigglers. They're not supposed to be corals that move. So I want to make sure they're secure to the rock and they're in a good spot and they're getting good flow that rinses them. Now, in my article, I mentioned I don't recommend laminar flow. And yet there's others out there that really think that's a great idea. So laminar flow is where the flow is all going one direction all the time. Where I'm from the school of thought that you want chaotic flow, where the flow is coming from different angles all the time and completely random and unpredictable to the coral, where it just gets hit from this side, gets hit from this side, it gets hit from above, comes up from below, comes here, 2 pieces crash and go this, divert into it. That's the way you want it to be in your tank. I think chaotic flow is your best bet because it's constantly kicking up the detritus and getting it off the coral. Corals that are in a tank that are laminar flow tend to lean with the flow and grow that direction and stay that direction rather than growing into the pear shape they should be, or apple shape, or ball shape. So, or a table shape. I remember I showed you guys the giant milka in my tank. It grew, it was sitting in the rockwork and it got up to the flow that's coming from these 2 conductors. And the coral went up and it went like this and just grew sideways. It looked really dumb. And that's because all the flow along the top of the tank goes that way. And my vortex are blowing water from below this way. And so it's kind of that versus a shooting up and this one's shooting down to crash together and cavitate and create random flow. So if you can have good random flow patterns in your tank, and that's one of the benefits of the random flow generators. If you put your hand in front of these things, they're 3D printed, and I sell them on my website. You'll feel the water hit this part of your palm and then suddenly down here and then back up here and then over here and then over here. And there's no moving parts. It literally is just doing it from the design of this nozzle. It's really neat. And at least you're not just pushing water straight ahead like a spa jet. You are literally setting water in different directions in the tank. It's pretty interesting stuff. but where the Milka was located, it just it just went that way. So, but other corals like the Shadowcaster, it grew up and tore the penductors. It literally was here and had branches grown that way into the flow, which I thought was really fascinating. So you can't guarantee how things are going to grow. We can't necessarily bonsai every single thing we plant in our tank, and you will see some things that surprise you from time to time. Now, other ways to secure an Acropora in your tank could be something as simple as a rubber band or a zip tie. If you use a zip tie, make sure it's a zip tie that's all plastic. Now, I know the whole zip part is plastic and the little part at the end seems to be plastic, but if you look in the hole, there could be a metal tine in there. Don't use that in your reef tank. Find the ones that are with a plastic tine inside, so when you tie it shut, it holds a little twig to like Tonga branch rockwork or something. And the acro will grow tissue right over the zip tie. I've seen it happen in my tank before. And sometimes you have something that's kind of clunky and you're like, I can't use putty, I can't use glue, I need something. Grab a zip tie. I had one big thick branch and I used 2 zip ties, and I thought, once it adheres, I'll just cut the zip ties. And then one day I noticed the skin was growing right over the zip ties. Like, oh, that's kind of neat. And so I just ignored it, left it go. I wanted to see what would happen. And I don't know how long it was, but let's just say 6 months later, I look and you could just see what looked like 2 seatbelts on the acro, but completely encrusted with polyps. Not branches, but just the polyps were coming out. It was so neat. I mean, it was like the whole thing was made, you get the idea. It was neat. From time to time, it would be smart to go through your tank with a turkey baster or a power head to blow off your Acropora just to keep them nice and clean. And then finally, I should have mentioned this earlier with the dipping process, and it was on my list, but I forgot. If you're so lucky, if you're lucky enough to get an Acropora colony, even a mini colony with a commensal crab in there, like an Acropora bandit crab, don't dip and kill it. The bandits are good guys. They live in the coral. They protect the coral from predators. They keep the coral clean, which means they may even, possibly even deal with like Acropora eating flatworms and redbugs. They may just devour them. But they'll even like make sure that algae doesn't take hold in there. And they are supposed to be in there. So if you get such a little bandit crab and you see it, fish it out of the coral with like, I don't know, an unfolded paper clip, and just kind of spook it out of there and get it into a body of waters where it stays safe. And then dip your coral, rinse your coral, put the little crab back in the coral, and put the coral in your tank. Unfortunately, I don't think any vendors sell like Acropora commensal crabs. It'd be cool if they did, and maybe one day they will. But that I feel is lacking in a lot of our tanks because everyone's so busy dipping and killing anything because they're terrified of everything. They're killing off the good guys. And the good guys are necessary. They're part of the ecosystem on the planet. There's a reason they exist. And by us killing them off and making sure they don't make it into our glass box of water, we're actually hurting our own efforts. So keep your eye out for that. Certain things are totally fine to have, and you shouldn't fear them. If you were to get a Porites, for example, which has Christmas tree worms in it, it may have Pagarita crabs. Completely benign, friendly filter feeders. Really cool to look at. Don't murder them. Okay? So, something to keep in mind. I did mention that pH has become a new topic. So, this was something that Randy Holmes Farley, who's our reef chemistry expert that's been around for 20 years and writing articles and helping people online for that entire duration. And he recently, in the last 6 months, posited that if you could keep your pH at a higher number and keep it there, then if your alkalinity dropped, it wouldn't affect anything and that the corals would be completely fine. And so my friend Mike, who I mentioned earlier, he actually performed that test. He had everything set up perfectly to where he could crash his alkalinity, but he kept the pH where it belonged through some chemical manipulation, and his corals didn't skip a beat. And he says, it works, he's right. But I still don't know what he did exactly, and I have not looked into doing it myself. My tank tends to run between 8.1 and 8.3 every day, so I'm not trying to be at like 8.3 around the clock. I would have to literally really think hard about what changes I have to make, what effort I have to go through to do this, and would I be frustrated? Would it become such a pain in the butt that I just want to go back to my old method, you know, because I've been growing corals for a long time and they grow. They look nice. But it's interesting that that has come up. So if your pH is chronically low, and Randy wrote the article years ago saying that he knew of reef tanks that were 7.7 to 7.9 and were perfectly lovely tanks. So he was, you know, back then he was suggesting pH is not as critical as we think, and let us focus on alkaline, calcium, magnesium. But now he seems to be, after all this time, thinking pH may be a little bit more important. So if you're dealing with a tank that's chronically low, you may need to look at what you can do to bring that pH up to a higher level, and on a consistent basis. Anything else? I'm checking my list, and I'm checking it twice. I sound like Santa. Oh, feeding. Okay, so we talked about all the other needs of an acro. One of the things the corals do need, they need to eat. And many of us like to have pretty fish in our reef tank. We usually look for reef-safe fish, fish that we can trust will not nibble on those corals, so the corals can grow, and we can enjoy the fish swimming around, and they're beautiful, and we enjoy feeding them. We feed those fish. And the fish devour the food and pee and poop in the water, and that stuff blows around in the water column, and the corals eat that. So it's not necessarily necessary to feed your acros directly. Now, yes, you've seen me use Benereef. Prodibia has Reef Booster. Reefroids is another one. And then there's the new green stuff that glows in the dark from Red Sea that people have been using in the last year or so. And these are all ways people are feeding their corals. All I can tell you is this. If you want to do that, that's fine. As long as your nitrate and your phosphate don't get too high and you want to do that, totally fine. You've seen me do it too. However, I can tell you this. There are people that have tried to grow, you know, like have grow out tanks filled with corals. And they're going to make a living. You know, they're going to sell corals for a living. And so they create these huge troughs, and they put in all the egg crate racks, and they put all their acroporas and their zoanthids and their montipora in there. And they have a lot of flow, and they have light, and they do water changes. And the corals look so pale and miserable. And they'd say, I don't really know what's happening. This should be working. And I'd say, add some fish to that tank. Or someone else told them, add fish to the tank. And as soon as they added some fish, all the corals colored up because they were getting the fish waste. So you do need fish in your reef tank. Very few people keep a reef-only zero fish environment. Very few. And having some fish in there, the fish are constantly feeding your corals a little bit throughout the day, throughout the evening. So if you have an auto feeder dropping in pellet food, if you're putting in a sheet of nori on the glass or in a plastic holder, or if you're putting in frozen food, or if you're dumping in flake food, that food is being consumed mostly by the fish. You see it happen. But you'll also, if you observe, you'll see LPS corals responding to the food. You will see SPS corals maybe putting out weird like tendrils that looks like threads coming off. That's a feeding response. These are all good things. And then dosing amino acids, I've always felt like that was a way to trigger a feeding response, but apparently it is a form of food as well. So amino acids could also be thrown into the mix when it comes to maintaining Acropora. I myself have been running amino acids on this tank now. I have a gallon jug that I've had forever that I never used. And I set it up to put in a small amount every day. And to be honest, I don't know that it's making anything any better. It does not seem to be making things worse necessarily. So I'm just trickling it in a little bit each day. But that is as far as I go with amino acids. I really don't have much more of an opinion on that. So there we go. That's the topic of the day. I hope that you found that interesting and inspiring, and I hope it helps you with your Acropora care. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start addressing your questions, because we always do a Q&A on this channel. And if you've not done this before, if you put @Mila's Reef before your question, it's easier for me to find it. But I'm going to scroll to the top of the chat, and I'm going to see what people said. And then I'm going to also take a second to say I still stand with Ukraine. I'm really worried about them. I keep reading the news constantly, every single day. And I don't know that they can win this thing, but I hope they do. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. I'm not trying to create a whole argument on YouTube. I just feel like this is ridiculous, and I feel badly for those people. All right, let me find a question before I talk too much. Keith, thank you very much for telling me that. He says Tidal Gardens has mean greens if I'm still searching. That's awesome. Thank you. That might be the way to go. I had someone, I talked about in the last live stream, someone sent me some mean greens as a gift because I talked about it. He found them and he shipped them, and they packed the order badly. And then I went on my, they never opened for 5 days. They were just closed up on the frag plug. And then since I got back, I checked, and now it's just a frag plug. There's nothing on it. I'm like, all right. So, I mean, the water in the bag was 40 degrees when I opened the cooler. There's no way those were going to live. Paul, the old reefer, says apparently gas is $5 USD per gallon. We are already paying the equivalent of $8 to $9 per gallon here in the, well, he's saying liter, so maybe he's the UK or something. So saying $5 is cheap. Yeah, I mean, it's more than we're used to. And right where I live, I'm in Texas, our prices are right around $4 right now. And there are people in California where it's like $2 higher, which is nuts. I'm really kind of surprised that that has been allowed to happen, that the Californians have not revolted against that. Because the only reason it's that much higher in California has to be taxes. It's just being taxed upon tax upon tax. And I mean, yes, Texas does make oil. We're famous for it. And we have refineries here. So the transportation of getting gas from part of Texas to where I am in Texas is less than taking it from Texas all the way to California. But I don't think it should be $2 higher for someone in another state. That's a little crazy. I kind of think it should be kind of uniform. Just like buying milk everywhere is about the same price. But yes, a lot of people are complaining about the price of gas right now. Everyone's talking about it. And then Paul transitioned into a reef question. Reefers over here are turning down their return pump flow rate and not running their skimmers 24/7, or they're leaving the hobby. Do you have any tips? I believe it could be because of what Lou Eckes is telling people from Tropic Marin. He's been encouraging people to run their skimmer less long. And turning the flow rate down on the return pump, I wouldn't recommend, especially not at night, because that's when your oxygen levels are dropping. That's when your pH level is lower in the tank. You don't want to have less surface movement. You want the water to be just as chaotic as always. I don't turn it down at night at all. I think turning off the skimmer for a few hours, I don't do it. But I feel like if I was going to turn off the skimmer, I would not turn it off at night. I would turn it off during the daytime. The protein skimmer is collecting dissolved organic compounds on the bubbles and pushing them up into a collection cup to export this waste. And we all see it. It's dark brown, it's green, it's reddish, it's gooey, or it looks like tea. It all depends if you're wet skimming or dry skimming. But besides it removing waste from the water, which I feel is like a safety net under a trapeze artist, where it's always under the guy to catch him if he falls, or the woman. And so having the skimmer on all the time will always be pulling something out if something gets into the tank, okay? Something drips in the tank, something overfeeds the tank, whatever. But it's also driving off CO2. And by driving off the CO2, it is pushing up the pH of the aquarium. So turning off the skimmer at night would actually create a lower pH during the late night, and you can test that for yourself. You can turn off your skimmer, and if you're tracking with an Apex or some other device, you can see what the pH is and just watch for an entire week with no skimming if your pH is always the same, or does it get even lower, like I think it will. So I would probably have the skimmer off during the daytime when my pH is already going up anyway, because of photosynthesis from the lighting. But I think the reason why there has been some recommendation about turning off the skimmer is because there's so many people that have zero nitrate and zero phosphate, and they're trying to get some in their tank. And so they say, well, if you turn off your skimmer, the waste isn't getting exported, and your nitrate and your phosphate can rise. That kind of makes sense, but you can dose nitrate, you can dose phosphate. So I would rather have the skimmer on all the time and dose the little bit you need to get the numbers up where they need to be. And then eventually the tank will be so mature that it actually has nitrate and phosphate. It's very rare that a mature reef tank does not have nitrate and phosphate. It's very, very rare. Most of those tanks that are mature have a problem getting those numbers back down. It's those new tanks. And you know, I did this video probably 2 years ago called the Reef Timeline. And in that video, I talk about when you're supposed to do each thing during the first week, the first month, the first 3 months, 5 months, 7 months, 1 year, 2 years. And one of the things I said was, don't turn on the skimmer at all during the cycle, because you don't want to export what's cycling. You want the cycle to cycle. And then you're going to put in a fish or a frag and see how it does. You still don't need to skim yet. It's not necessary. And I think people are turning on their skimmers way too soon. And I think that's where the whole skimmers take a while to break in myth came from, because they're running a skimmer on a tank that has nothing to skim. Other than the initial dust that came off a brand new bag of sand, there's nothing to pull out of the water. And so the skimmer's doing nothing. Like, this skimmer doesn't work, or I can't dial it in, or it needs to break in. I was like, no, it doesn't. You need a tank with stuff in it so it has something to skim. It's sort of like me buying a brand new house, and a lot of times a brand new house comes with a brand new dirt yard, and I'm out there mowing, and you're like, what are you doing? I don't want the grass to get too tall. Like, you don't have any grass. Exactly. So you got to grow the lawn, and when the lawn starts getting taller, then you cut the grass. Same thing with a skimmer. You need something in the water column for the skimmer to take out. And I've never installed a skimmer on a tank and it not start skimming immediately. I've never had to break in a skimmer ever, and I've used about 9 different kinds of skimmers in the last 25 years. And every time I put a skimmer in the tank, within 2-3 hours, I'm seeing stuff in the cup. So those of you that put a skimmer on a tank and get nothing, maybe the tank wasn't ready for a skimmer yet. All right, I'm ranting. I should stop. Anyway, I hope those people are not leaving the hobby. That was the last thing Paul said. I mean, there's a lot of reasons people leave hobbies, but hopefully it's not because of skimmers and return pump flow. Lynn Ann says, I'm new here and would love to get into saltwater and reefs, and I'm trying to learn all I can. This channel is packed with information. I don't even know how many hours there are total on this channel, but there's so many topics. And you could just kind of wander through the video collection I have, because I have hundreds of videos, and find some topics that you think are interesting and work your way that way. I think one day I may try to organize these in some kind of a succession, like chapters of a book, and create a group that this is a good group to listen to. But I realize some of my videos are very long, and that the reason they're long is because of the live streams. And usually the first 45 minutes to the hour is the topic. Today was different. And then after that, it's just question and answer, forever answering everyone's question. And so when you're looking like, oh my God, that's 4 hours, the guy talks forever. That's because I was talking about a lot of things and answering a lot of questions, but it's that first hour. And then some of my other videos are more to the point. In the beginning part of my YouTube career, I would make a video that was, whatever, 15, 20 minutes on one topic. And then there's some entertaining videos too, where you get just see pretty things or see places I experienced. So it's all here for you. And of course, you can always ask questions. Let's see. Joshua says, what's your take on maricultured acros? They're kind of 50-50. I bought my share of them, but they are 50% chance of survival, which isn't great. You'd think it'd be way better. But for me, historically, it didn't do so well. It just seems like we have way better success with little tiny frags than we do with beefy little corals. But that doesn't stop us from wanting something larger, because no one wants to look at a tank with a bunch of 1-inch frags. We all want to see some little mini colonies. And sometimes you can get a mini colony put in your tank into as well. Sometimes it hates your tank and it liked where it came from and it just dissolves away. And so it's kind of hard. But, if you see something you like and you've got a good spot and you've got all the things I discussed earlier in this video under control, give it a shot. And you may have some really good success. Chris says, what are your thoughts on this week's supposed Vibrant scandal? It's been more than a week, but yeah, this has been going on for a while. I'll tell you something. It's kind of funny. When Vibrant hit the market 2 years ago, it was kind of a red flag for me from the beginning. And people kept talking about using it, and they kept talking about how they liked it and how it worked for them. And people kept asking me on this channel, what do you think of Vibrant? Should I use Vibrant? How do I use Vibrant? What do you recommend? And I kept telling them, I've never used it. There was just something about, there's something my gut didn't like. I don't even know what it is. I mean, I'm thinking back, it's a bottle with a pretty picture on the front and it says Vibrant. You'd think I'd be in love with it. But there was just, there was something unknown about it that just kind of made me leery. And I never chose to use it. When people say, hey, well, if you're trying to fight Valonia, you should use Vibrant. I'm like, I've got FluxRx. And they're like, well, I recommend Vibrant. I'm like, okay, well, I don't have any. So, and I never wanted to buy it. I had no desire. I never, ever wanted to try this product. And I don't know why. I really don't. I have no idea. I don't even know who sells it. I don't even know the name of the company. If you said, who makes Vibrant? I wouldn't know because I've never looked that hard. That just somehow, I just pushed it out of my field of vision. And so while it comes up all the time, I just keep scrolling. And recently there's been some discussion of some studies, some scientific reports that are saying that what's in Vibrant is actually exactly in another product. And everyone's mad because they're saying we were told it's this special blend of this, this, and this, when all it is this. It's this other thing with a pretty label. And a lot of people are saying, and this stuff, you know, because remember, I told you so many people said it worked for them, but there's a whole bunch saying it didn't work for them and it killed stuff they cared about, and now they finally understand why. And because I'm not in the middle of it, I don't have an opinion other than that sucks. If it turns out to be true that this was a BS product from the beginning, it'll go away. You know, it's no one's going to buy it. Everyone word of mouth is going to warn everybody, and that's going to be the end of it. But I just don't have any personal experience with it. I've not used it, and I didn't have any need to because I had other things that did the job, so I never felt like I had to delve into something that was a complete unknown to me. All right. Serge says, I lost about 15 frags of Montes, Acros, Fabias, lots of general SPS because I changed my light setting on the Radions. I literally just threw everything away and I'm very sad. Yeah. Okay, so since you brought this up, I do want to mention this, and I wrote an article on this as well, a separate article. I'd been running the Radeon Gen 4 over my Anemone Cube for years. I don't know, 4 years, and never touched the schedule. I set it and I forgot it. And I know a lot of you guys love to tinker and you like to fine tune and make things even better. And yes, I was growing anemones, but in the bottom of that tank, I had an acan, a huge acan, this one right here. That one was in that tank. I had a huge Montipora colony, a Tyree blue flower petal Monty that grew and grew and grew, and my hippo tank slept in it at night. It actually made a hole and would swim into that spot, and that was its bed, its bedroom. And that was living down on the sand bed. I had walking dendros in there. I had fungia in there, all these different corals down there. And I never changed the schedule. And when I was selling people those little anemones, the little nano-nems, the thing was, people would take it out of my tank and put it in their tank, and it was much prettier. And I was like, yeah, I always hear that. And one of those friends came and goes, Mark, I don't get it. Why don't these anemones look pretty in your tank? And he's like, you should look at that light and maybe make some changes in the schedule. And so I thought, yeah, he's probably right. You know, I already told you I use that radiant schedule that goes up and comes down, but I could shift the color spectrum slightly. I could change the intensity slightly if I wanted to, right? So I looked at what I'd picked for my schedule of lighting, and then I found that by just increasing my light from 75% where it's been for 4 years, to 80%. A 5% change dramatically changed the entire look of the aquarium, and it looks much nicer. And I thought, wow, how crazy is that? A 5% change. So this person, Serg, said that he made a change in his tank. He didn't say how much, but mine was a very small change, and it made a big difference. So I wanted to emphasize, if you're making any kind of changes with your tank, always make a very small change and observe for a long time before you make another change. Now, I really mean like wait 3 months and see how everything responds, not a week, not 2 weeks, not 1 month. 1 month is not enough time. A lot of things take a while to adapt and change. 3 month duration would be what I'd be doing. Now, if you say, I can't wait 3 months because in 3 months it would be dead, yeah, you need to make a bigger change. I mean, if that's what's going on. My system was established and going for a long time. It just wasn't pretty enough. I discovered I could make a couple of tiny tweaks, increase the lighting percent by 5%, and everything looked so much more robust and pretty. And I was like, wow, I should have done that sooner, you know? But I did not take it from, I mean, even this tank. When I set this up with the skies, I put those lights over the tank. We measured carefully what the par was with the metal halides. Then we measured what the par was with the skies, and we lowered the intensity of the par, the sky, lower and lower to match the par of metal halides. And when we were done, the skies were running at 50%. And he was like, "What?" I mean, that was Terrence. He says, "Wow, I would have thought you'd get more light from those metal halides than the skies at 50%." I was like, "Yeah, that's really interesting." And then I left the lights at 50% for probably 3 months. And then after 3 months, I bumped it up to 60%, and I've never touched it since. So the peak of my day, that tank behind me is getting a total light of 60% of what the sky can put out. And, sure, the thought crossed my mind, should I bump it to 70? I don't think so. Everything in the tank is doing really well. Everything's growing. I have one coral that looks weird that I'm going to move. And I got one blue torte I need to put back. So to change the intensity would probably be the wrong move for my tank. I don't think anything would demand it at this time. But if you're going to make changes, I would recommend gradual changes and then really give it time to see how it affects your corals long term before making another change. Unless there's something detrimental really happening and you have to make a bigger change now. If you just aren't putting enough light in your tank because you're super nervous, and you're like, yeah, like someone posted in the club that they run their tank lights all blue all the time, and when they use 1% white, their corals hate it. And I was like, there's no way 1% is making your corals hate it. There is no way possible 1% white is pissing off corals. No, it's not possible. Not possible. If she had put 60% white all of a sudden, yes, totally possible. 1% is nothing. It's 1%. That's 99% not used, okay? So you can always make little incremental changes and observe and realize it will take time for the corals to adjust, adapt, and either proliferate under it or retract and be miserable under it. And you have to find out what is going on. And you also have to keep in mind, what are you using? We were talking today about Acropora, but a lot of you are responding to what your torch is doing or what your anemone is doing or what your gorgonian is doing and basing the entire tank on one thing. We want to know what everything's doing. And we want to see the majority is doing well. And then adjust those few corals and put them in different spots with different flow, different neighbors, different light intensity, different duration to find what will make them happy too. But it's very, very rare to have every single thing in your tank super happy all at the same time. And usually when my tank is like that for 1 or 2 weeks a year, I celebrate because I know it's very brief. Everything's happy at once. Oh my God, let me open the champagne. And then for the rest of the year, this is not happy, but these are good. These two things aren't doing well, but these are good. And I have to remind myself not to hate my reef because one thing's unhappy. It's a whole mind game. Quentin says, Pasillipora is the Kenya tree of the SPS side. That's funny. I have 2 pieces of Pasillipora in this tank behind me right now. I put them in there intentionally. And people always say, well, I've seen it. Never in my tank. But I've seen it where they'll it's called polyp bailout, and it'll throw itself off and land somewhere else and maybe grow on the return nozzle or grow on the glass or show up on a different part of the tank. I've never had that happen. I probably wouldn't like it if it did. It just depends where it landed. Maybe it's growing in a spot that's perfect, that needed something, and it fills it in and looks nice. But if it was a real problem, it was spreading like chicken pox, like Mahanos, then yeah, I would say it's a problem. And I was visiting a fish store kind of on the Dallas side of our area, and they had something growing everywhere. I'm like, what is that? And it was a type of Acropora. I'm like, wow. I said, I actually kind of like it. And like, we don't. I'm like, yeah, I hear you. I understand. You know, when you're trying to sell corals, you want them on the racks, and you don't want things growing on the back glass and in the egg crate and on the nozzles and everywhere. And it was like in every tank. It had really spread. I don't even know how they did it. But at the same time, they didn't scrape it all off and throw it away, so maybe they didn't really hate it as much as they pretended. Jetsla says, I haven't caught a live stream for a long time. Just wanted to say, keep up with the great work. You're such an inspiration to the hobby. Also, are you ever going to come to Australia? Well, thank you. I want to thank you for this award. And I appreciate that. I would like to come to Australia. I would really like to dive the Great Barrier Reef, or even better spots that certain coral sellers know about, you know, the secret spots. But yes, it's on my list. I would like to do that. Who knows? Maybe 2023, 2024 will be a trip for this dive I've always wanted to do. That'd be nice. Cameron says, I've got an acro on a frag rack that has encrusted 40% of the rack. It's even covering the bottom, and it's growing downward. It's pretty cool. You know, it's kind of like you almost want to just drop an empty frag plug on the frag rack covered in coral so it can repopulate it, so you can have a new frag you can share. That'd be nice. Marcus says, I just mixed up a fresh batch of salt to 1.026, and the alkalinity measured 5.8. I remember your story about a salt that had no alkalinity. Yeah, that one was Kent, and it was 1 DKH out of the barrel. Crazy. So yeah, always measure. My big poly tank, I had it mixed up perfectly. I even did a Reef diary about how I had to get the salinity just right. And then accidentally, I left the valve open that feeds the RO water in there. And when I was refilling my top-off containers, the water in this container didn't go up. I thought, what is going on? And it was pumping into my perfectly mixed salt water. I was like, dang it. Because then I had to go ahead and figure out how much water was in that vat, what the salinity was, plug in the Reef salinity calculator to determine how much more salt I need to add, pour, go into the workshop, open a huge barrel, scoop out 13 pounds of salt, pour that into my container, let it mix. And I was like, oh, because I had it just right. And there was like 180 gallons of water, but because I dumped in like 30 gallons of RO, it diluted it and it lowered it down to like 1.023. And I was like, no, I got to fix that. So I have a vat filled to the top with perfect water. And I was actually thinking of this weekend doing a water change on my Reef. I mean, it is March, so I might as well do a water change. So yeah, you want to make sure when you have a batch of salt water that's mixed, I always recommend that you measure the alkalinity before the water change and see what the number is. And you'll probably need to buffer it up before you put it in. So you can use baked baking soda. You can use the Reef chemistry calculator to determine how much for the amount of water you have, from the alkalinity you have to the alkalinity you want it to be. And then you add it to the water, let it mix really well. About 20 minutes later, you can do your water change. And your tank should not skip a beat because the alkalinity is the same as the alkalinity in the tank. Bruno, thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate it. Marcus is right. He got that from Caitlin. Water tests save lives. Norbert says, you stream? Dude, I've been streaming like for 4 years now. There are so many live streams on this channel. You welcome to a new part of what I do. Oceans X, or Oceans 10, says, I test alkalinity daily. I have a full dominated SPS tank. Stability is so important. I have plenty of acros. My alkalinity is 7.5. I dose ESV 2-part, bi-weekly water changes, and that's it. Keep it simple. So let's talk about dosing, because we didn't talk about that. I just told you what number you needed to have. But when it comes to dosing, it's so important that you dose properly. And we have all this wonderful gear. I was almost going to do a topic on this, but I don't think I have enough information to drag it out for 45 minutes. The basic premise, and who knows, maybe I'll just do it next week anyway, but I just want to say, so here's a preview. I just want to say, just because we have access to automation does not mean we should fully trust automation, okay? Automation's fine when it's working right, but when it doesn't work right, everything falls apart. So I would much rather you know exactly what your tank needs in every aspect. Your tank needs this much water for top off every day. Your tank needs this much alkalinity mix per day. It needs this much calcium. It needs this much magnesium. It needs this much iodine per week. It needs this much potassium. You know, I want you to know these numbers and not be guessing, well, if I run my dosing pump 1 minute, my number seems to be okay. That's not how you do this. That's guessing. That's not math. We want to know, and I really would prefer if you manually did these things for the first few weeks or months as you and your tank become familiar with each other. And then when you feel like you've got this, and you know, I always add 18 milliliters of alkalinity, and I add 4 milliliters of calcium, and I add 23 milliliters of magnesium, and that works for me week after week. Then you know exactly what numbers to plug into a brand new dosing pump when you're filling out the app on your phone and you're saying how much alkalinity to put. And then it gives you options like, do you want to do this once a day? Or do you want to do a piece of this every hour for 24 hours? Or do you want to do this once a week? I mean, there's all these options, and you can get overwhelmed with all these options. Like he said, keep it simple. I would recommend dosing the alkalinity once a day in the morning. But if it's a big amount, like let's say you're dosing 100 milliliters, you might want to do 20 milliliters every 20 minutes until you've done the 100 milliliters. And that's it. And then do the calcium in the evening. And again, whatever that number is, if you want to break it up over 2 or 3 hours, you could. Or you can just dose it all at once, because it's trickling in anyway. It's not like I'm taking this much magnesium and pouring it in my tank. It's not one big bloop. It is going trickle, 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 and you're seeing the drops just hitting the water. And then you want to make sure that where the dosing is landing in your sump, that the water is cavitating and mixing. If you have to put a power head there to shoot the water around in the sump so that as the drips are hitting, it's immediately mixing, perfect. That is so much better than having it just settle like oil and water to the bottom of the sump and crystallize and not do anything for your system. So automation's great when it's working. It's better to know exactly how it works before you ever automate the process. And that way, when you do need to automate, you know how to program it, and then program it as simply as possible. I would not recommend breaking it up over 24 hours. Just like I don't top off over 24 hours. I actually have my top off turn on every 90 minutes to see what the status of the tank is. And if it needs water, it'll give it some. And if it doesn't, it'll wait another 90 minutes before it looks again. I don't let it just top off every 10 minutes every hour or something like that. And also, you need to also verify that everything is working when it comes to your automation. You literally need to look and make sure that if you say I want 18 milliliters of alkalinity, you need to put a beaker under there and actually hold it under there during a dose and see if you're getting 18. You might be getting 12 or 24. So you want to make sure it's the right amount every single time. You want to make sure the tubing isn't clogged. You want to make sure the reservoir isn't empty. You want to make sure the pump hasn't failed. You want to make sure there's not a crack in the line to where it's sucking in air and no liquid's moving at all. I mean, there's so many points of failure with automation that you have to now babysit, as well as just having to dose the tank. Now, still, it's so much nicer to have this stuff set up, but you got to be vigilant. You got to keep your eyes on what's happening to make sure that nothing gets forgotten, so that way you can enjoy your tank and not stress about it. Okay? Norbert says, I've been dialing in my doser for my 18-gallon cube, and it's between 8.5 and 9.2, and I feel like that's a big swing. It's not the biggest swing. It's okay, but you do want to dial that down. If you can get that somewhere, I don't know which number you want of those two. Maybe you like 8.7. But yeah, if you can get as close to that and kind of stay there day after day, that'd be great. Oh, wow. So Lincoln says, after months of coral dying, I finally tested my alkalinity was 4.1. It was a test that he never did. Yeah, these tests are so important. And when I convince you to buy the test kits, if I don't, maybe Coral Magazine does or something you read. The thing is, I need you to do it every week. It's hard enough to get you to buy the kit. Now I need you to use the kit. And I always feel like I'm convincing you to do it, and I shouldn't have to. I am going to pester you and irritate you and annoy you with this because it's that important, because it literally is the difference between living corals and non-living corals. But yeah, it's really important that we do it. Let's see, I'm looking for the next question. Oh, someone asked me on the last live stream in the video, why do you not run UV? And do a whole video on that. So I don't remember who asked. Somebody, he's a regular though. I recognize the name. I have never owned a UV in my life. The only UV protection I have is the kind when I go to the beach. I don't, I'm joking. I don't have any kind of UV. I've never felt the need for it. I kept thinking if I ever owned a UV, it would be on a quarantine tank or a hospital tank for a fish that's sick. But I don't run one on my system, just like I don't run ozone. I mean, there's certain tools I just have never chosen to use. I mean, think how long I ran metal halides while all of you guys had LEDs. And I just kept sticking it out. I'm like, nope. And to be honest, I still have my pendants, I still have my metal halides, and I still have my ballasts with backups of all three. So, oh, not three. The pendants are the pendants. But I have extra bulbs and extra ballast and beyond the stuff I have that still functions. And I don't need them, but I don't want to throw them away. And I don't think anyone wants to buy them. So it's kind of I'm in limbo there. But I guess if a sky ever failed, I could fling one up there and get some light in my tank immediately while the sky is being repaired. Yeah, see, that's why I have them, backups. Mike, place that order with me soon. You should do it. Here, I'll give you a little reminder. Ding! Yeah, I'm back, and I am filling orders, so thank you. And I'm working really hard I got a lot of orders, custom acrylic orders done before I left town, and I had such good momentum going that I almost didn't want to take my trip because I wanted to just keep going and just knock them out and get everyone off my list, and I tried really, really hard, but I had to go. It was a whole series of birthdays and anniversaries happening, and I had to get on the road and drive and be there on time for my father's birthday, for their wedding anniversary, for my stepmother's birthday, who's my mama, as well as my own birthday got celebrated, because when my birthday happened in January, I didn't celebrate it because I had no one to be with. Normally I would have seen my son, my grandson, and his wife, but they had COVID. And I was like, stay away from me. I'm about to visit my parents, and I don't want to bring anything with me, nor do I want to get sick. And so I celebrated by myself, and it was kind of, I had fondue and champagne and television, but while I was with my parents, we had a nice celebration with presents, which was great, and that made me happy. Let's see. Dave says, does anyone else have Acropora frags change color when they're newly introduced into the tank? I keep my parameters perfect and par ranges between 180 and 200, but I lose all the nice coloration. Yeah, your par is much too low. Literally, the par level you're talking about is my sand bed. My sand bed is between 100 and 200. And then as you go up in the tank, there's more and more par. And if the tank has high nutrients, if there's high phosphate, high nitrate, colorful corals will turn green or brown. But if you can get the water parameters under control and have the right lighting intensity and decent flow, those corals can get their color back. That's the nice thing. It's not a on or off situation. They can shift color, but they can shift back. So the color that's happening in the coral is, I hope I'm saying this right. I think I'm right. Now I'm starting to second guess myself. I believe it's a symbiotic zooxanthellae within their tissue that gives them their color. And that algae within their tissue is excited by the light that's turned on over the tank every day. And the light creates photosynthesis in that algae, which produces sugars, which is energy for coral growth. And I would say coloration is a big part of it, and your PAR sounds like it's too low. Your PAR probably should be more like double of what it is right now. But don't just jump from 200 to 400 all of a sudden, because whatever corals you have now might just go up in smoke. You're going to need to gradually bring it up, like maybe between 25 and 50 PAR for a couple of weeks, and then maybe another 50 PAR for a month, and then another 25 PAR, for a couple of weeks. So like in 3 months from now, you could go from 200 PAR to 400 PAR. But yeah, and like I said, these corals are not dead. They're just the wrong color. And when you get that finally to where it needs to be, which some lights have an acclimation period, you can actually program it and tell it start acclimation now, and it'll start at whatever it is, 40%, and work its way all the way up to 83% or whatever number it is you pick over a 2 or 3 month span. And then you may see these corals coloring up. Also, if you have corals like Acropora and something goes wrong in your tank and the corals shift in color like mine did when I was missing the potassium, and we watched things just completely change color, as long as they didn't die, I didn't give up on them. I mean, this coral right here, that's a chalice. That thing was bone white. There was not one speck of color in it, but the chalice existed and it was alive. And I dosed potassium for weeks, and the color started to come back in patches and fill in the skin a little bit more and a little bit more. And it's still not 100% green. Right here in the very front, that's a white spot and it won't go away. I'm like, I want that gone. And then this one over here, there's a little spot in the back that's white. You can actually see it on camera. But all the rest of it's green. But that whole colony was white. And I had other things that turned brown. I had other things that lost their green. So as long as the coral's alive, it can regain its color when things become more optimum in the tank. So keep working on making it better. Bruno says, can you speak about the Redfield ratio as regards to nitrates and phosphates? Like Vibrant, that's another one of those topics I just ignored. I kept hearing about it. People talked about it to death. I've never, ever taken the time to watch a video on it or read an article on it. I heard it's, you're supposed to have like this much phosphate to this much nitrate. For me, I knew the general rule was keep low nitrate, keep low phosphate. And I had much higher nitrate than the average bear for a super long time. And I finally got it down where it belongs. And, ironically, I mean, the corals weren't healthy. Okay, they were alive, they were big, but they weren't healthy. But ironically, since getting these numbers way under control by exporting so much waste that was trapped in the sandbed for 8 years, a lot of things look a lot better, but I started seeing issues. Red bugs, acroporian flatworms, green hair algae, cyano. I'm like, where'd all this stuff come from? I don't ever have this stuff. So those things are showing up because my numbers are in a better range. And apparently that range is great for all the nuisance things we don't want. Hello. It's great seeing you, Ian. I must have to double check myself on that. I've been wondering how you've been doing, so I'm glad you sent in a wave. Yay! Good job. It'll go out on Monday. Mark has placed an order for a smart stir. Reef the Sea Forever, clearly forever, says, I still have my 6500 Ushio bulb. Guys, 6500, that is literally yellow light. It is the sun. Reef the Sea Forever also said, I recently set up my 400 watt metal halide on my 15-gallon tank. It was ridiculous. I didn't set it up. I just had to try it. Yeah, that's too much. That's funny. Boy, that would have been one hot tank. 400 watts. Let's see. Christopher says, how often do you feed your acros and what do you feed? I feed the fish every single night. So they're getting fish poop every single night. And I seem to remember to feed Reef once a week. I wish I could step that up. I just forget. Reef is a powder that's very fine. And when you mix it up with tank water, it activates some bacteria. and you can pour it into your tank, and it's plankton size, which is great for all those little tiny SPS mouths to consume it. And it doesn't create things like cyano and nitrate and phosphate issues. That's what's so impressive about it. So I really like it. And the thing is, I have to pour it in a cup, and I have to mix it with water and remember. And wait 5 minutes and then pour it in the tank. And I usually don't think about it. And then I do nori, I don't know, 3 times a week maybe. And I would like to step that up as well. I'd like my tangs to be, I mean, my tangs are looking good, but I'd like them to be a little thicker around the belly. I don't know. That yellow tang's really nice. The coal is actually in really good shape too. Spock, I feel, could put on a few more pounds. Let's see. Anton says, "Where's your beard?" Man, that went away a long time ago. Tim says, "I meant to ask, do you have any Acropora in the reef? If not, I bet you'd really enjoy it." I have tried in the past a couple of times to do a Acropora, and it's usually this little frag. I mean, back in the day, in 2002, 2003, I had a potato-sized Goni. It was beautiful, but it didn't last long, and that was what everyone was saying. They don't last long, so I've always considered them to be a very hard coral to keep alive. My friend Jason, who's on this channel, on this live stream sometimes, he has a whole bunch of them, and he's been dealing with some kind of disease on his Gonis, and he had to put them through a whole cycle of medicating them every single week for like, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks in a row. And he's finally done with all that, and he's about ready to put them back in the tank where they belong, and he's hoping all that bad business is behind him. But I remember I bought a small, pretty little Goni frag. It kind of looked like an encrusting Goni rather than like a rock that's a flower pot that's pretty. And it just didn't do well. And I'm assuming I wasn't feeding enough to that coral. So I think if I did something, I might do an Acropora. I like those a little bit more. They're a little bit easier, but I haven't seen one in forever. Oh, by the way, urchins, I wanted to mention, I got these 11 urchins. I never see 11. I've seen about 3 or 4, but they're actually quite a bit larger. So I need to see on Instagram when I posted that picture of them in my palm, or when I shared the video. And then, because I feel like we're coming up on 2 months, and I was told when they're 2 months old, they'll be full size. And I want to put 1 or 2 in my palm again and take one more picture, because I want to show the difference. I think that'll be kind of fun. So I'll probably do that this upcoming week. I need to see the dates, make sure I get it right. Tim says, "What do you think about having a Tank of the Month winner for Club Mueller's Reef? We could feature it on the stream." I like it. That's a great idea. Somebody has to do it, though. Somebody has to organize it and run with it and bring me the information. And then if we're going to feature it, I want some nice, clean videos sent to me that I can share with you guys so it looks really nice quality and not like I captured a Zoom call on a potato. Michael asks, "Could you give advice on things to expect when upgrading to a large tank, 350 gallons, maintenance tips and tricks, etc., moving from 120 to a 350 in the next 2 months?" Well, I guarantee you I've got at least 4 videos on that exact topic. So I would scan through the titles and see if you could find it. When I go to my YouTube page, it shows like home, and then it says like videos, and then it says community. There's also an option for search, just to search my videos. I assume you guys can see this as well. And you can type in anything, and it'll whittle it down to the videos that pertain, like tank upgrade, tank move, switching stands, or whatever. But I have discussed it a bunch, and it'll happen again as another live stream. But it's a big, long topic. It's not something I can just answer here and give you, 5 quick little points, because there's so many things to consider. And the good thing is you have 2 months. You have a lot of time to plan, and I bet you're thinking about this every single day. And the more you think ahead and you think of logistics. I mean, I'm a huge logistics guy. I'm always thinking, what would it take to make this happen? How does that work? How could that go wrong? What can I do to avoid that going wrong? And I do that all the time. And if you do that, you will be a lot more successful than if you just wait until 2 months from now and like, today's the day, let's figure it out. That would be a terrible way to do it. Since what's your favorite John Hughes movie? I don't know. I need a list. Adam says, do you think kalkwasser is worth adding in addition to two-part to bring up pH? It's definitely a method that can be done. I would be very, very cautious with it. Myself, I've always said if I were to use it, I would not set it up with like an auto doser. But you can dose it. But what I would do is I would have a fixed amount in a container. So if the doser went bonkers, it could only use up that fixed amount. Like, for example, if I wanted to dose 1 gallon of kalkwasser every single night, I'd mix up a batch and I'd pour 1 gallon into a container that can be dosed. And that way it just trickles it in until it's empty. But it would not accidentally put in 5 gallons, 15 gallons, or a kalkwasser reactor that just feeds water through it nonstop until I finally see a tank that looks like milk and everything inside is dying. I don't want that to happen to me. So that stuff has a pH of 12. Another downside about kalkwasser is messy. There's a lot of cleanup, literally cleanup. The container itself needs to be cleaned up. You don't want the sediment to get in the tank. You don't want the skin on the top to get in the tank. So you want the body of clear liquid to get in. And you got to mix it up in batches. So you got to do that, which is more manual labor. And then I told you the risk of overdosing and having too high a pH that could nuke your tank. And then the other thing is that kalkwasser tends to gum up the magnets inside our skimmers and return pumps. So there's a chance that you will find you're having to up your maintenance on these other pieces of gear because they're getting calcification on those magnets, which is also another pain in the butt. So out of all the years, I did kalkwasser for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. Like, this is not for me. And I just stopped doing it. And the follow-up question for that same question about kalkwasser, do you think it'd be okay with an ATO? No, I do not. First of all, your top-off varies from season to season. And I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe you may be topping off more in the winter than you are in the summer. Maybe that depends where you live. I don't know. But I believe we use more water when humidity is lower, which tends to, believe it or not, be in the winter. Even though there's rain and snow and sleet and all that, I think generally speaking, we have less humidity. Here in Texas, we have a lot of humidity in the summer. And I can run a dehumidifier all day long, and within 12 hours I have to empty it. I have to empty it twice a day. And in the winter, I can hook up the dehumidifier, and it may run for a day, and it doesn't need to run again for like 2 weeks. Like, it just takes forever, or it never fills up because it's taking out so little moisture out of the air. So if you're not evaporating the same amount of water all the time year-round, your kalkwasser additions will vary too. You may be putting in a whole bunch of top-off during one part of the year and very little top-off during another part of the year, and you're wondering, well, why isn't my pH where it normally is? What's happened? And am I mixing the kalkwasser wrong? Like, no, you're dosing it. And then the thing is, top-off systems can fail and continually dose, make a mistake, and put too much in your tank at once. And it's super dangerous. Again, that's the whole thing. Like, this container under my tank holds 43 gallons. If that was kalkwasser top-off and it's supposed to top off my tank for an entire week, sure, that's great until the day it decides to put in 43 gallons of water all at once. My system's 450 gallons. 43 gallons is a lot, but it would just kind of knock down my salinity some, but it would not push my pH up to like 10 or 11, or the maximum is 12 with kalkwasser, and I wouldn't lose a bunch of fish and corals. So I've never done that. So if it was me, I'd have a small container that I can control how much is going in, and that would be my daily thing, and it would kind of suck, and I'd probably hate it, and I wouldn't want to keep doing it long term. One Eye Drunk says, I can't win against cyanobacteria. Any advice? I've tried all the powders. Okay, so I don't know how bad your situation is. I don't know what size your tank is. I don't know any details. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know what food you're using that is creating it. I don't know if you have too much flow or not enough flow. I don't know any details. But I do have an article on my website of how to treat for cyanobacteria with successful completion. So I would recommend you go to that article. It won't be hard. You can go into Google. You can type in cyanobacteria, Miller's Reef. First article you see from me will be what you need to read. And basically, you're going to vacuum out all that you can before you treat the tank. And then you will turn off your protein skimmer. You will put in the chemical, which I like Red Cyano RX. Another one I like is ChemiClean. Either of those two brands. I sell Red Cyano RX, so if you want it from me, you can get it from me. If you want to buy ChemiClean from someone else, you can. Whatever you want to do. You mix up the right amount and you put it in the tank. The brands both suggest you put an air stone in the tank to add air to the tank so you don't lower the oxygen level to the point where you hurt your fish. And you leave that skimmer off for 3 days. Don't take the collection cup off. Turn off the skimmer. No skimmer. Clean your skimmer. Soak it in vinegar. Put it outside. Disassemble it. Rebuild it. And then on the 3rd day, do a big water change on your tank, 25% or more, making sure that alkalinity, temperature, and salinity match your tank. And then turn on your protein skimmer. And your skimmer is going to want to overflow and overflow and overflow. But the cyano is gone. And you're going to just keep letting the skimmer waste clear, watery water. Just throw it away and keep track of how much you're throwing away. You might throw away, it depends on the size of the tank, but you may just find, oh my God, I've thrown away 2 gallons worth and it looks like nothing. It looks like water. Just keep throwing it away and replace what you're throwing away with new, clean salt water until the skimmer settles down. And then you're done. This process of dumping the watery skimmate may take you 6 hours. Total pain in the butt. But if you do what I'm saying, you will solve the problem that day. The cyan will be gone in 3 to 5 days. The skimmer will be controlled within 6 hours or so, maybe 8 hours. And then your life continues as it always should. If you don't do what I say, and you'll either just keep having cyano, or you'll have a skimmer that never settles down, and people say, oh, I just turned it off for 3 weeks and waited. Or, there's all these workarounds, and none of them do what I say. All my stuff is manual labor. Do the job, solve the problem, and move on with your life. So I would recommend you do that. And if you do it, you should have a tank with no cyano. Marcus, thank you very much for the super chat. He said, great topic and always appreciate the streams. Banana money for Spock. That's good, because I gave her some banana today, and she's going to want me to get some more. And now that bananas are $5 each, I'm kidding. I hope I'm kidding. Let's see. I can see all the political stuff I brought up. Sorry, guys. Now people are talking about Ukraine. They're talking about gas. They're talking about pipelines. Like, oh my God, what have I done? Robert says, do you dose phytoplankton? Actually, I haven't, and I have a bottle and a half in my fridge. I need to before it goes bad. I have PhytoFeast from Reef Nutrition. And when I do put in the tank, I just kind of put in an arbitrary amount I like, and I turn off my protein skimmer for about an hour so it doesn't skim right back out. And it's one of the things, I should commit. I should just like put in this amount every day and not just do it when I haphazardly think of it. It's just one of those things that I don't think of because I haven't done it in so long. But I used to be a guy that grew his own phyto and put phyto in every day and grew my own brine shrimp and put baby brine shrimp in the tank every day. And it was part of my routine. And I think it was when the 280 cracked and leaked and I had to break it all down and I took down my entire live food section where I was making my own food. It just kind of all went in my rearview mirror and I just don't think about it much. And I did get some phyto from Reef Nutrition, I guess back in December. And God, it might have been November. It might have been for the 8-year anniversary of the tank, actually. I think it was a gift from them for that anniversary. So it's getting old. I got to use it up before it goes bad. So thank you for the reminder. The nice thing about dosing phytoplankton regularly is it can help keep your glass clean longer, which is a nice side effect. Oh boy. John says, any advice or tips for dealing with a neck bulging disc issue in regards to tank maintenance? I fell on the ice in January and I have 3 bulging discs and a pinched nerve in my neck, making things fun. Yeah, that's no fun at all. Okay, so I'm a guy with a problem with his neck all the time. I can tell you a few things. Anything you can do that doesn't require lifting is going to help a whole bunch for your healing. I'm a big fan of Aleve. I only take it once a day, and I take 3. And everyone's like, 3? And I asked my doctor, what happens if I take 3 pills for the rest of my life? She says, you may have some stomach issues. I'm like, all right, well, I already have neck issues, so the Aleve makes me feel better. So I do that. The water changes you're doing when you're doing your tank maintenance, if you can do things where you can roll the barrel over, you can pump the water up, you can pump the water out of the tank, anything where you're not lifting a bucket would be really, really smart. Because 5 gallons is basically 50 pounds you're lifting above your shoulders, more than likely, right? Even if you step up on a step ladder or on a chair and you bring it up to your waist, you're putting a lot of stress on your neck and back. I have 2, I sound like an old guy. I have 2 of those soft gel ice packs, and I will just put one on my shoulder blade area and let it just frost that area to make myself feel better. And usually doing that, I can do this and I'll hear something pop and crack and I feel a little bit of relief. Sorry you got hurt. You're going to have to really take good care of yourself because you need that spine for the rest of your life. But some maintenance, you may actually have to get someone else to do it for you. You can ask someone to help you with like scrubbing the glass or scraping the back, or hire the fish store for a visit or two and oversee and tell them what to do. I mean, you do have some options. If you're in a club, you can ask club members to come over and help you briefly while you're down. I mean, when I had my cracked, or what do you want to call that, my rib problem, where the thing had been dislocated from the cartilage, I had a 500-pound barrel of salt show up, and I told the guy, I said, I'm really sorry to do this to you, but I need you to put that from your truck in my garage. I can't do it because of my rib. And the guy says, no problem. And he had to push it up a driveway and up over the bump and into the garage. And he took it off the pallet. He did everything. It was really nice of him. And that was not his job description. But I couldn't budge that thing. I couldn't. Just thinking about it made my rib hurt, you know? Let's see. What is good par for chalice or favia corals? I would say somewhere between 100 to 200. Because usually those are down on the sand. And that tends to be a decent par for most tanks. Ryan says, any advice on new frags that brown out after being added? Wait until colored up or move? Oh, I would just wait till they color up. I would wait forever. I would wait 2-3 months and they'll color up. I mean, think about it. Some of us go to a fish store and we look for the brown coral because we know that's going to be a gem and we're going to get it for a better price. And we bring it home, we put it in our tank, and we just wait. And then in a matter of a couple of months, it starts looking much, much better. And I have found some really cool things over the years, like, ooh, that's got some serious potential. I want that one. Like, okay, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, that's the one I want. I came home with one of those ones from Aquashella. I haven't even looked at it yet. Yeah. I picked up one at Aquashella, and I was like, huh, that one looks interesting. I want that one. The guy's like, okay. And, you know, it looked like nothing. And ooh, it's got some really cool looking colors coming out of it. It's gonna be a slow surprise, but it's already looking a lot better than what it did when I got it months ago. Lincoln says, how much par do you think our home lights can add on top of the tank lights? I run my tank blue, but my home lights are always on, making the tank look a lot more white. You're not getting any par from the room light. I don't care if you have a reading lamp by the tank, pointed at the tank. That's not going to do it. That's not going to give you, I mean, if you owned a par meter, you can find out for yourself. But ambient room light is nothing like the light that's shining straight through the surface of the water of your aquarium versus the light that's, you know, like when I was doing some photography and I put a light next to me and showing it in to lighten my subject. Yeah, that looked great. But it made me kind of think, man, what if I rigged a light from the front of the tank to hit the corals from the side? So that way they look good on the side and on the top, you know. But who wants to keep moving that rig out of the way? But no, our lighting in the house isn't going to do anything for the tank. Good question, though. Mr. No 3, Mr. Nitrate, I think, says, can you talk about dosing iron? My test kit shows 0 and I'm dosing it, but it's not showing up on my test. Could this Red Sea iron be very diluted? Oh, I'm sure it's very diluted. I'm very sure of that. Almost everything we buy in this hobby has been diluted for profit-making reasons. I mean, it makes sense. And I remember when we, what was it? Phosbuster Pro. Phosbuster Pro came out before Phosphate Control, which became Phosphate RX, which you guys know I love. People were buying Phosbuster Pro like me. And everyone started screaming, my yellow tangs are dying, my yellow tangs are dying, my yellow tangs are dying. And I had yellow tangs and they were going through it fine. And, you know, I talked to them at, I think Phosbuster Pro is from Carib Sea. I don't think it's Seachem. Anyway, I talked to one of the guys and I said, so everyone's complaining about their yellow tangs. What are you guys going to do? And he says, Mark, we're going to dilute it. I was like, oh, don't do that. And he's like, that's really, I mean, we can tell people to buffer up their alkalinity and then use Phosbuster Pro. But if we dilute it, we're going to lower the risk. I was like, but it's going to cost us the same for the bottle? And he's like, yep. I was like, ah. Another example of us getting less for more money. So yeah, and that was a long time ago. But yes, your iron is diluted. Iodine is diluted. Everything's been diluted. Now, your test, I can't answer to that. I don't know why you're not showing any kind of reading, but I can tell you iron is part of the ICP test. So you can dose your tank with iron, and then you can take a sample and send it off and see what you get back from them to find out what it's measuring at, and then decide if you want to dose more or not. Dosing iron is usually practical for when you're trying to maintain macroalgae, and it helps fuel some algae growth. My tank grows algae. I got a turf scrubber full of algae. I've got a refugium full of algae. I saw a little bit of hair algae by the anemone. So I've not had to ever dose iron. But at the same time, and that iron is included in your salt mix, by the way. So if you're doing water changes, like a 10, 15, 20% water change would be adding a fraction of iron through the water change into your tank to buffer up what has been depleted by macroalgae in your system. But if you can't find a test kit that's readable, or if that gives you a number, you may need a different test kit. We definitely don't want to overdose the iron accidentally, that's for sure. So I would have to lean into ICP testing at least to find out what your baseline is now to see if you need more. Another thing you can do if you want is you can mix up a batch of salt water and you can send that sample like I did and see what the iron is in the batch of salt water, so you have a general idea of how much is going in each time you do a water change. Ferdy says, what spectrum do you use on Sky? All right, I'll tell you. I'll just look at my thing. So my schedule, it starts off with something called all blue, custom, custom, coral growth, custom, all blue, sunset. So custom would be me picking certain colors I like. Alex says, have you seen Sanjay's 500-gallon Acropora dominated tank? I sure have. He posts a lot of pretty pictures of it on Facebook. RE, I kind of talked about kalkwasser before, so if you would like to use it, you can. There are general rules of mixing it. There's also, in the past, you used like 1 or 2 tablespoons of kalkwasser per gallon. And then some would add a little bit of vinegar to help dissolve it more fully to have less sediment at the bottom of the container. And then you set it aside and you let it settle out to where the sediment's at the bottom and the skin at the top is disgusting. And you would siphon out the liquid in between the skin and the sediment, and that is what you would dose into your tank. Bill says, I have a pink Ghani I've had for 13 years and it's now softball size. There was a guy who was in our local club and he had a red Ghani this big, maybe bigger, and it was filled with clownfish. And he had this huge tank, and this thing it's too big, it's taking up too much space. And I was like, man, I'd love it. I've always heard red Ghanis are easier than the green ones. And he says, okay, come get it. I said, okay. So when I got there, I said, what are you feeding it? Because you're literally doing a great job and I don't want to kill this coral. And he said, all I feed this tank is flake food. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. He's just throwing in flake food and the Ghani won't die. So I put that Acropora in my tank, and I had a purple one and I had this red one. I put them side by side. I thought they'd be gorgeous together. And there was this one aptasia on the purple Ghani. So I took the Ghani out of the tank, went to the sink, used some kalkwasser solution to kill the aptasia. Then I rinsed the rock with more tank water, and then I put the rock back in the tank next to the red Ghani. And when I put the rock back in, all this kalkwasser came out of the rock and burned the other Ghani to death. And it ended up killing both Ghanis. I was so mad at myself. All because of one aptasia. I should have just ignored the aptasia and been happy to have 2 beautiful Ghanis. And it was really frustrating because I'd just taken pictures of these beautiful corals the day before, and then I just burned them, so badly. It was really stupid. I think this says Slacker, maybe? 5 Lacquer says, will daylight savings change affect any programmed events in Apex or other gear? Mine is set up for daylight savings time, so everything just shifts, and I don't have to worry about it. I may have some dosing pumps that are going to be an hour off from when they normally work, but normally I don't even pay attention. Like, for example, I have a really old ice cap dosing pump, and it just says put in this much once a day. And I don't think it knows what time or date it is. It's very analog. It has an LCD display, but I've never programmed a date or a time into it. I don't think I can. It's just on, off, this much, once a day, every day, once a week, never. It's that kind of programming. And then my Versa, maybe Mobius keeps track of dates and times. I don't know, probably does. Apex has a daylight savings time setting. And then, Kessel probably has something. Every program, every different app out there, different device we use, some are affected, some are not. Alex says, what are your thoughts on killing reoccurring cyano? I'm thinking about using air stones to increase pH along with ChemiClean. If you have reoccurring, like it happens once or twice a year and you have to treat the tank to kill it once or twice a year, I don't think that's wrong. That's just part of running the Reef tank. Just like you had to do a water change, or you had to clean your skimmer, or you had to scrub the glass clean. These are just parts of our duties. And people said, oh, you shouldn't use chemicals. It's bad, or you're cheating, or whatever. It's like, no, you're fixing a problem with something that is proven that works. And reoccurring would be like it keeps coming back. If it keeps coming back, like you treated the tank, you get rid of it, and a month later you have cyano again, and you treat the tank again and it comes back, then it's got to be probably something to do with your food. Like, for example, Reef Nutrition makes a food called Oyster Feast. And I can literally put in like 3 drops of that stuff in my tank, and boom, I see cyano. And I have seen that happen to me time and time again. And every time I'm like, I'll never use this again. And then, like a couple of years goes by and I'm like, all right, I'll try Oyster Feast because I have clams, or I'm trying to do such and such. I'll grow sun corals better. And I put it in, boom. I'm like, I did it again. So it's like, that's the one I just refuse. I will never use Oyster Feast again. And if I win a package from Reef Nutrition, I say, don't give me Oyster Feast, because it's, I'd waste it. It would just go bad. So, but it would be nice to just handle it. Kevin, I don't know if you're talking to me, but he said you don't deal with salt creep. So I wipe the rim of the tank down from time to time. And I wipe down the rim of my sump from time to time. That's about it. Mr. Rudefish says, I love that name, how do you get rid of aptasia, as folks have different approaches? Well, I have a copper band, which has taken care of that problem in the Reef. My anemone cube, on the other hand, has a lot of aptasia because it's just anemones and clownfish. And aptasia are anemones, so technically they are not persona non grata. They can be there, but I don't like them. You can use peppermint shrimp if you want. F-aptasia is a really good product if you can get it on top of it and completely coat it and just cocoon it in this product. The product will become a hard shell, and there's an acid in there that will just burn whatever's underneath the F-aptasia. And F stands for what you think it stands for. It stands for F. I mean it. That product will get rid of aptasia better than most products I've seen on the market. And the company that invented it is Frank's Tanks, which is a fish store by me, with his partner, who's a dentist. And these guys cooked up this stuff, and he sells tons of this, and it's available everywhere. Yes, I sell it on Miller's Reef. BRS buys, I don't know, boxes and boxes of it, like 1,000 at a time or whatever. Whatever. All the companies want it and everyone wants it all the way around the world. Everyone really likes this product, so I'd recommend that to you. Tim says, do you run a dehumidifier? What are the benefits? Yes, I do. I haven't had it plugged in for months because all this stuff going on with the house, it's been in the back room out of the way. But the benefit is that all the metal grates on the ceiling for the air conditioner and heater don't rust. Everything was rusting. The front of my fridge was rusting. And so I started running a dehumidifier. And like I said, we are very humid here in Texas in the summer. And I like to run it at night while I'm asleep so I don't have to listen to the stupid thing. once I move into the new building, I can run it during the daytime. It won't even matter because I'll be out there. Yeah, it's really to keep my house from melting. There's a lot of water behind me. KK warns me about the Aleve. He says it can cause renal issues. Look at creatine and bun in your blood work. Fortunately, I have a fantastic doctor who takes like 14 vials of blood once a year and analyzes my DNA down to my DNA. I mean, she literally goes down to the atomic level and tells me everything. And she's watching it all. So thank you very much for the heads up, though. I appreciate that. She is literally on top of all this stuff you're describing. She discovered something in me I didn't even know happened. And I mean, my whole life I didn't know I had such and such. And ever since her advice came in, she, I've been following her directions. I've been with her for like 5 or 6 years. It doesn't even matter what insurance company I'm with. If my insurance doesn't cover her, I just pay cash to see her, to keep her, because she's that good a doctor. And then, when the next insurance company says they'll accept her, I'm like, great. And I get to get a slight break on the bill. But yeah, staying alive because of her. AJ says, when are you going to man up and get a laser cutter? Very soon, I'm sure. Just bust out the credit card. Kevin Jones wants to know why Caitlin died. Well, I mean, the medical examiner came back with natural causes. And I still believe it was an aneurysm. But I don't know that I can believe the medical examiner. Just what happened, it was sudden, it was instantaneous, nothing could be done to save her, and happened in my arms. I mean, it was like instant. It was shocking. It was horrible. And I talk about her daily. I talked about her the whole time I was with my parents, which, she died over a year ago, and I still think about her all the time. Let's see. AJ says that Oyster Feast stuff did the same thing to me 3 times. F that stuff. And he means F. All right, guys. I think we're going to wrap up here. Remember, today is Water Test Saturday. I've been talking about testing the whole time. Please do test your water. You're supposed to do it every single week. That's why the kit has like 50 tests in it. So you want to make sure everything's right because water tests save lives. And we just mentioned Caitlin. Caitlin's the one that came up with that phrase. And I love it. So we definitely want to make sure we're keeping our reeflings happy by doing our due diligence and knowing what the numbers are so we can make those micro adjustments to keep all the parameters exactly where they need to be so we can keep Acropora and everything else alive. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Maybe I'll see you tomorrow at the